We're going live, my people. Going live, going live. Yo, my people. Is anybody tuned in? Is anybody tuned in? My people, how you doing? Ausares, Louise, Uwacu in the building. If anybody is tuned in, let me know so I can hug you. Hey, my people, okay, I'm gonna start hugging with the people who are sitting on the right. Hug the people in the front, yo, and the people over there, yo, let's start seeing our live audience, studio broadcasting international. How you doing? I'm chilling right here, Vancouver, Canada. Waiting to connect with our guests who's supposed to be in Africa, South Africa, Zimbabwe. Yo, how you doing, my people? If you're here, I'm here. Let's get this show started, and then we're gonna talk about ourselves. We're gonna talk about Africa. We're gonna talk about Canada. We're gonna talk about Zimbabwe, South Africa. We're gonna talk about it all, my people. Welcome to the show. Your favorite host, Ausares, Louise Uwacu in the building. All right, my people. Okay, so let's see who is here. Yeah, okay, peace and justice, yo. I see you, Daniela Monorena. I see you, I see you, I see you, I see you, I see you. Where's Gatewuke? I see you. Yo, Gatewuke, thank you for connecting us to this brother. I saw this brother when he did an interview with Gatewuke and Kazuba, and I was like, this is definitely one of those brothers that we need to expose even more, give more exposure. You know, we're about exposing, inspiring people, my people. We're about exposing and educating, inspiration, you know, Africans who are inspiring, my people. That's what we're about. So this brother that we are supposed to talk to today, yes, so I saw him through this other activist network, and I was like, yeah, definitely. So he's not in studio yet. I don't know where he is. If anybody knows him, please send him a message for me. Be like, yo, turagutegereje muri studio. What's up with that? We're waiting for you in studio, yo. We are waiting for you, Kagoma Egre. I see you. Okay, in the meantime, let me say hi to my people, yo. Kizito Mihigo. Komera cyane. Kora cyane, Daniela Monorena, Kagoma Egre, icharugubwe neza wangu. Ewa, babahe. Yicare, just sit down, relax. We're about to have a good time. If anybody has questions, I would be happy to be answering your questions right now. This is a great opportunity for me to be taking questions while we wait for our guest. We don't know what happened to our guest. So maybe they have an issue or something, but they definitely know and they've been reminded. So we'll see if they show up. So comment from Kizito Mihigo, ta politique fondée sur la méritocratie. J'ai travaillé dessus et j'ai dégagé un programme. your policy based on meritocracy. I've been working on it and I have a program and we are listening to you, man. That's what it is, man. That's what it is. You know, people need to be celebrated for their excellence. People need to get the positions that they deserve because they're qualified, because they have skills, because they have experience, because they're competent, you know? Yo, Eric ndayishimiye mukomere mwese mukomere mukomere mukomere. Yes, yes, this looks good. N'est-ce pas? Reka tongere dushyiremo his picture. He's a good looking dude. A good looking dude, man. Okay, you know what? I'm gonna call him from my phone because what's up with that, right? So, we are live on YouTube, we are live on Facebook, we are live on Twitter. I would just like to tell everyone who's watching and commenting from YouTube, from Facebook, that I can't see the comments from Facebook. Like all the shows that have been passing here now, been going on Facebook after the show and seeing so many comments. I just want to say all the people on Facebook that I cannot see your comments right here. I don't know why. I only see YouTube comments. So you want me to see your comment? Go on YouTube, comment from there. I'll see your comment. In the meantime, Rosette Janti, Yabi, Rosette, right here, ready to get good knowledge from you guys once more. Thank you for the show. Yo, we are here, man. We're here, man. I love doing this because it brings me closer to my positive vision, my positive village, which is about education, bringing education to Africa, Africans in the village, transforming the village from a simple village into a positive village because of education. My question, Evangelina. Hey, why you look cute? Yo, who you calling cute, man? Who you calling cute? Cute how? I like Joe Pesci, you know, they tell him he's funny. He's like, funny how? Funny how? What do you mean? What do you mean? What exactly you mean? Yo, man, I don't know, man. It could be the camera, man. It could be the camera. How you not gonna be looking cute? You've been showering, you've been shaving, you've been putting some makeup. But if you don't look cute after that, yo, it's over for you. You ain't cute. You ain't never been cute. You're never gonna be cute after all that work. If you ain't cute, come on now. Ah, my people, yeah, if the guest doesn't show up today will be the day that I entertain you myself. Yo, you know, first of all, I went on television because I was entertaining. So, you know, I can entertain you the whole day. I could entertain you the whole day, man. I'll tell you, if the guest doesn't show up, yo, I'm gonna be cracking jokes from now till the next morning. I could go ahead. Enthusiasm is contagious. Yo, it's a spiritual thing, right? It's the spirit, it's the vibe, it's the vibration, it's energy. Just like if you put on a light in one room, it's going to illuminate the entire room. How could it not be contagious? It's spiritual. I mean, I'm sending you my spirit. Can you feel it? Oh, oh, oh. I was gonna say maybe I should even put some music so we can just be dancing. Because today is Friday, right? This is another reason why I'll be taping the show on Friday. I love Fridays. Everybody's cool, relaxed, you know, enjoying the day. And then when I started this show, we're doing this show at the CurveTV studios. And the people who used to work on the show, the people who are new are volunteers, right? So volunteers to come in on Friday, it's much easier than to get people on Monday morning. So I'll be like, yo, I'll tape my show on Friday so I can get all the people who want to volunteer to come and work with my show at the studio on Friday. And then we can have pizza, we can have a party after the show. You know what I mean? It's Friday. Cologne ndagukunda igikorwa cyacu dushyira heza ni ukuri ebana ariko si ubuzima ni bugufi bana tujye twiberaho neza none se byagenda gute ariko vure umuntu akagira kuba yaravukiye kuri iyi si hanyuma akagira no guhora muri stress kuvukira kuri iyi si byonyine birahagije. After that, oh man, we should be peace and joy and love. You know, spiritually speaking, the only emotions that is allowed in you and I's life is peace and joy. Okay, this is a spiritual law, my people. The only emotions which are good for you, which are going to bring goodness to your life, which will not harm you, is peace and joy. Anytime, this is the only legal emotion. Any other emotion that you may have in your life is illegal, my people. Illegal, eh? So I'm telling you, some people are having illegal emotions, such as anger, and then you see what it does. While we are waiting for our guests, can you dance for us? Yeah! Yo. So which song? Yo, don't even provoke me, man. Don't even provoke me. No, tell me which song. Tell me which song, man. Tell me which song. And then let me also put the studio link. If anybody wants to come to the studio, chill with us, ask questions live, be part of the show. I'm putting the link in the show so you can be part of the show if you want to be part of the show. Okay, my people? Right there, you got it. Anybody want to come into the show, be part of the show? Yo, we are here. Claudine J, we are here, yo, people, my people. Yo, my people, have I ever told you why and how you are my people, my people? My name is Uwacu. And if I am Uwacu, my people, then who are you to me? If I am Uwacu, who are you to me? You are my people because I am Uwacu. Yo, dans tes blagues, tu lâches des vérités. Yo, c'est ça même. C'est ça la culture rwandaise. Ngukuri gushirira mu biganiro. You know, not freedom of speech exists in Kinyarwanda. It's just that people don't know their culture. So they think freedom of speech and democracy is something that's going to be brought to them by other people. But we have it in our culture already. I can show it to you. Okay, so I'm attempting to call our guest, my people. This for the show, which is going to go on TV. Maybe they're going to cut this out, depending on how. Hello?
Yes, hi.
Mr. Matinyarare, this is Louise Uwacu, Ausares. We're in the studio waiting for you. U&I Talk Show.
I thought the thing was supposed to be in an hour's time. That's my time that I've got here. Okay. Yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much.
Have you sent me the link?
Yeah, I've sent it in your inbox on Facebook.
All right, thanks.
Perfect, thank you.
I sent you my number. Did you get it?
Yeah. This is why I'm calling you. I'm using it. I'm like, thank goodness you did that. Thank goodness, right?
I don't have the message from your inbox here now. Oh, you sent it yesterday, all right?
Yeah.
That's fine.
All right, thank you. See you soon.
Okay.
Yo, my people. Yo, he's coming. Mr. Matinyarare is coming. He's ready. Yo, it's all these time zones. We're in Vancouver. We're in the Pacific time. I don't even know what that means. And then there's like people in London. They're like, oh, London time is the general master time. Why London time is the general master time? Because London will be going around the world colonizing everybody. And then they'll be like, okay, from now on, our time is the general master time. The rest of you people have to know your time according to my time. Really, really great question right here. How can you be so happy, dear? It's difficult not to have the illegal emotion, such as anger, when this Ingotanya are killing our people. This is a very, very good question. You know, I have a new book, my third book that I finished writing, just waiting for a publisher to come out. And it really goes into details, telling you about who are we as a people, who are we, our identity as human beings, as spiritual beings. And then, so from how you identify yourself, from knowing who you are, is how you can be able to always be checking yourself, always be conscious of how you're feeling and how you're thinking, so that you can be in control of your feelings and your thoughts, so that it's not someone else who's going to come from outside you. And depending on what they do to you, they make you react. So while you're reacting, you're losing yourself, you're losing your divine self, and they're attracting you into your lower self. And that's when you find anger and everything. So this is a very important question, and it all depends on identity, how you identify yourself, and how you are permanently in touch with the divine self, so that you could be in control instead of the outside people controlling you, so that no matter what these killers outside you may do, they are incapable of touching your divine self. And that's how you remain at peace and joy. And that's how you are able to remain intelligent, because when you're in anger, your intelligence goes down. This is science. And then, so if you always remain in your divine self, then you cannot be upset. Then Satan cannot have the upper hand on you. So you are at peace and joy, and no matter what's happening outside you, you remain in control, so they don't get to harm you twice. Because they harm you twice when they destabilize you from your peace and joy. They harm you twice because not only have they killed your people, so that's harming you, but they have also succeeded at touching the divine you, the inner you, and destabilizing you and bringing you down into anger. So they harm you twice. So you reduce the harm by at least remaining in control, by knowing who you are, and by knowing that the only legal emotions are peace and joy. So you can remain there, so they don't get to harm you any further than what they have already harmed you. And it doesn't change anything if you react crying or if you react at peace. It doesn't make the offense any lesser. It just makes you lesser, because now you have less power to deal with your challenge. You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying? And the church said, what? Imana. Yo peba pesa yo. Yo. Somebody is suggesting here that while we wait, we could be dancing. Okay? But then I'm going to be dancing, and then I'm going to mess up my makeup, and then by the time the guest gets here, it's going to be like, yo, Louise, why are you sweating? We haven't even spoken yet. Yeah. I share, my people. Yeah. All right. Okay, my guest is right here. Perfect timing. He is right here. All right, let's bring him into the show, my people. And then maybe we're gonna dance after the show. Because, Let's be cold for now. We're gonna dance after the show. If you still feel like we should dance, which I'm still gonna feel like I should dance, you know what I mean? But after the show. All right, Mr. Matinyarare.
How are you? How are you?
Thank you so much for being here, yo.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Looking as good as always.
Thank you.
Ladies, where you at? We have a handsome guy in the house today. Oh, so thank you so much for being here. South Africa, Zimbabwe in the building. Um, let me tell people who are following us that you can find Mr. Rutendo Matinyarare on Twitter, and his handle is at Matinyarare. And first of all, Rutendo Matinyarare is a prolific marketing strategist. Yes, I can hear you. You're doing good.
All right, just remove me from the screen while I just sort out my.
Perfect. All right. So usually what he does, he's a marketing strategist specializing in branding and digital offline marketing for Frontline Studios consultancy. My people, you can find, you can go on his website and see what kind of services that they have. Yes, and this gentleman is Zimbabwean. Yes, originally from Zimbabwe, and originally from Zimbabwe. Yes. Who remembers the Bob Marley song Zimbabwe Freedom Song? You know about that one. You know about that one. You know. And then I see Gatebuche mu Kinyarwanda, excited to see Rutendo. All right, he's right here. Are you back?
Yes, I'm back. I'm back.
All right. We have a comment here from one of your friends, Gatebuche, excited to see Rutendo, one of Africa's most important advocates. Can't stop listening to him.
That's Claude. That's my guy from Rwanda right there. Love that man. Very knowledgeable guy. Very knowledgeable guy.
Absolutely. He comes prepared all the time. So, what is it about Zimbabwe? The first thing that I wanted to start on, speaking of Zimbabwe, is something that I saw recently, and I was like, okay, I'm going to ask you to comment on that. It's about, you know how they make classification of how people are happy and how people are happy in a given country and in the world. So they made this classification, and Zimbabwe is like one of the place where people are really unhappy. It's like the top place in Africa where people are unhappy. The only other place where people are unhappy is in Rwanda, in Africa. So I was going to ask you, like, we may know why people are unhappy in Rwanda. It's a dictatorship. This dictatorship be killing people, imprisoning people, exiling people, but we don't really understand why people are unhappy in Zimbabwe, because we used to hear about Mugabe, but Mugabe is gone now. But so what's going on in Zimbabwe, and why are people unhappy, and what is it that you're doing or that we can do to contribute to Zimbabwe's happiness in the future?
Right. So I think first and foremost, we need to be very careful about studies that we do not really understand who sponsored them, what is the research question, what is the methodology of collecting the information, and how the information was collected, the sample size, because then we begin to have biased information or bias on the dependent variable, which is very dangerous. So I always believe that there are other statistics that you can look at to corroborate or to check or to verify information to determine the truth or veracity of information. For instance, if a country is unhappy, I would expect that it's what you call it, its suicide rate would match, its murder rates would match, and there are other factors that we could measure that will determine whether that is true. And if you look at the suicide rates or at the countries with the highest suicide rates in the world, Zimbabwe is not on that list. And if you look at the nations with the highest murder rate, Zimbabwe is not on that list. Highest femicide, highest child killings, it's not on that rate. And I would believe that those are some of the behaviors and aspects that you'll find in a nation of people that are unhappy. Another thing would be the index for the use of mental health issues, mental health medication. These are also other indicators that are absent or should be compared to this. And Zimbabwe is not anywhere high on those measures. And then when you also look at the sociology of Zimbabwe, and I would also assume that even Rwanda might be said to be one of the most unhappiest countries, but it doesn't appear on the suicide rates, doesn't appear on mental health issues, doesn't appear on murders and so forth. So I also don't necessarily believe that even Rwanda's rating is correct. And the nations that usually do these studies are the same nations that also told Black people not too long ago that they are animals and a lower standard of human being than other races. So I see those as problematic surveys. And as long as those surveys do not include other Africans, as long as the sponsors are obscured or the sponsors are usually Western, then usually it's a narrative that is being made. It's a manufacture of consent. And a lot of the manufacturers of the consent that is being manufactured is very dangerous. So that's my very first point that I would like to make to what it is that you said.
Very, very interesting. So then let's jump into, if Zimbabwe was unhappy, why would they be unhappy? Does it have something to do maybe with the sanctions? What's going on with the sanctions? Zimbabwe is under sanctions, and you are on the front line of the people who are campaigning for this Zimbabwe anti-sanction movement.
What is interesting is that Zimbabwe has been under sanctions for 21 years. However, most people on the ground do not understand that they're under sanctions. They believe that the problems that they're facing in Zimbabwe are organic problems, they're natural problems. And funny enough, many people don't really care about it because Zimbabwe is an agrarian society. 70% of our people live in the rural areas and they live off the land. They live off mining minerals and resources. They live off tourism, and they're self-sustaining, self-subsistent. So such people do not really see the economic effects and impacts of sanctions upon their lives. It is the people that live in the cities, the people that are in business, the people that work, the people that run businesses within the city setup, which is 30% of the population, plus the diaspora population that are living outside Zimbabwe, that actually feel the impact of these sanctions. And so to say that Zimbabweans are totally unhappy because of sanctions, I would be lying. However, people like myself have seen the impact of sanctions in Africa, particularly when you look at what sanctions did to Libya. Libya was put under sanctions. Those sanctions were steadily kept on Libya for a while. They destroyed the economy. They began to cause some unhappiness in the country. And sanctions always come with something called covert operations, negative sentiment, propaganda, lies, and a deprivation of the country's capacity to produce, which then makes the country dependent on Western countries, Western NGOs, Western media, which then begins to cause divisions, fragmentation that may become civil unrest and which turn out to be foreign intervention, which is the objective usually of the sanctions senders. So because of knowing those impacts, knowing those effects, and being one of the 30% that live in cities, one of those that are living in the diaspora, I understood that the culmination of sanctions will be a deprival of democracy, where people are forced to vote for political parties that are anything other than the ruling party because of the unhappiness or the difficulty of life due to sanctions, particularly in the cities where people are most active in voting and participating in democracy. I also believed that it will cause fragmentation. It will cause people to be unhappy with each other. It will divide families based on the fact of who do they choose to lead the country? Do they choose their ruling party, which is under sanctions and can't deliver services adequately? Or do they choose an opposition, which might not necessarily have a proposition for the people, but they will choose it anyway because their government is handicapped, and they'll assume that an opposition or a change in government would give them something to work with. And that causes divisions that can actually cause unrest. And so when I realized these problems, I began to educate the Zimbabwean people about the fact that our country is in trouble. It's in danger. It's in danger of fragmentation. It's in danger of civil unrest. And it's in danger of regime change agenda, foreign intervention by the West, like we saw in Libya, Iraq, Yemen, Syria, Afghanistan. And I didn't want that for my country. And that is one of the major reasons we began to fight against these economic sanctions. And I believe that next door to Rwanda, you have got Burundi, and they had sanctions on them. And then all of a sudden, their president dies, and the moment he dies, there is a new president, and then the sanctions are removed because the objective of the sanctions had been achieved, which is regime change. And this time it was regime change that came after the death of their leader. This is what we didn't want in Zimbabwe, and that's why we're fighting those sanctions, even though they don't necessarily make everybody in Zimbabwe unhappy.
Wow. So this is something very interesting that you just said, because so it's as if when the Western powers, the colonizers, occupy Zimbabwe, then they can have some sort of success. But when Zimbabwe liberate themselves and say, we don't want the colonizers here, then they do everything they can, putting on the sanctions and everything to sabotage the new regime, the new independent sovereign Zimbabwe regime, so that it may fail. And then when it fails, the people will be like, oh, you see, we were better off under colonization. Wow. Okay. So this is how you may have some people in Africa who actually celebrate colonization and how good it was under colonization.
Well, if you look at Zimbabwe's context, the sanctions that you see today actually began even before we got our independence. So I always like to say to Africans that Europeans, Westerners, are very forward thinking. When they want to destroy independent African countries, they do not start trying to destroy those independent African countries when they get independent. They start trying to destroy those independent African countries even before they get their independence. And if you look at Rwandan history, you will see that Rwandan history is filled with a division of people in the country according to ethnicity, certain ethnicities being given power to rule over others, while we were still under colonialism, to ensure that you're always going to have problems or spanners in the work when you do get independence. This is the same thing that happened in Zimbabwe. And it starts off actually with an interesting situation where the United Nations imposed sanctions on the colonial power called Rhodesia, by saying that it was a crime against humanity because it would not give independence to African peoples. And we, as the Black people that were fighting for our independence, the Black people who were in a liberation struggle against this colonizer, thought that the United Nations was actually doing us a favor. And therefore, because there are people that sat on the Security Council that actually allowed this imposition of sanctions to be acknowledged and accepted, the perception was the Western countries that voted for sanctions on Rhodesia, on the colonizer, were actually in favor of Zimbabwe. What we didn't realize is that this was the second set of sanctions after the colonialism itself to be imposed on Black Zimbabweans, so that by the time we inherit Zimbabwe, we're going to inherit a country that's underdeveloped and indebted because of these UN sanctions. And so the British and the Americans and the Europeans deliberately voted for and did not veto the sanctions that the UN wanted to impose. And they did it at the time before the United Nations started doing impact assessments on human rights to determine how to impose these sanctions so that they don't affect the common man. And so the sanctions were imposed. And yes, they didn't affect many Zimbabweans because 90% of the Zimbabweans lived in the rural areas. But what it did is it began to influence and affect the future of the Black independent nation. Because what happened is that it deindustrialized Rhodesia, the industries that had machinery, the machinery got old under these UN sanctions that lasted from 1967 all the way through to 1980 when we got our independence. It also forced the Rhodesian government to start taking debts and loans. And because they were under UN sanctions, they could not take straightforward loans from financial institutions of the world. They had to take secondary loans from secondary tier institutions that were breaking UN law, that were giving these loans secretly, and these loans then came with very high interest and very short payment periods. This was then inherited by Zimbabwe. So when Zimbabwe gets independence, it actually inherits 700 million US dollars, which is about almost $3 billion today, of debt that was incurred because of the UN sanctions and because the Rhodesians were fighting our fathers. So they actually borrowed money at high interest, short-term loans to buy weapons to stop us from getting independence. We didn't realize as Africans that that was the very second set of sanctions after the colonial underdevelopment itself to be imposed on Zimbabwe. So we inherited a country that already had debt, that had underdeveloped industries, where even our fuel refinery had been obsolete because of the machinery that wasn't replaced. And when we asked the IMF and other multilateral institutions to give us money to upgrade these industries that were destroyed in the period, to upgrade the fuel refinery, they refused. They said that they were going to give us money for other activities other than to re-industrialize. So we were deindustrialized during this colonial period by UN sanctions. And the process of deindustrializing countries in order to then have them unable to sustain themselves is actually a well-known and well-studied strategy that was used by the Americans and the British, who decided to underdevelop Germany and Japan after the Second World War, utilizing something called the Morgenthau Plan. The Morgenthau Plan was supposed to turn Germany and Japan into agrarian societies that are deindustrialized so that they will never have the capacity to rebuild their weapons. That's what they did to Zimbabwe and most African countries. They never applied it on Germany and Japan, though, but they did apply that strategy on African countries. And we didn't realize that the UN sanctions did that to Zimbabwe. And remember, the UN sanctions were imposed while we were already going through 17 years of a war of liberation, which also destroyed the country. So by the time every African country gets independent, it usually has huge amounts of debt, it's underdeveloped, is deindustrialized, and this causes its people to leave the country, and it causes sometimes problems within the country itself among the people, or civil unrest. And it also usually comes with tribal divisions. So those sets of sanctions is what we inherited. And once we started going in, we've got the situation that in South Africa next to Zimbabwe, they were fighting apartheid. And the moment Zimbabwe got independence, the South African apartheid government said to Zimbabwe, come and join a constellation of Southern African states in which we all agree that we're going to develop separately, white people on their own, black people on their own, and so that we can legalize this apartheid and show the world that black people and white people don't necessarily want to live with each other, but they want to live separately. Zimbabwe refused. It got into something called SADC that was actually designed to stop Southern African countries from being dependent on apartheid South Africa so that they can fight and remove apartheid. So by refusing to join this institution created by the apartheid government and their Western partners to legitimize apartheid. Zimbabwe's refusal caused South Africa and the West to start sabotaging Zimbabwe and other countries in the South. And so they actually went to war in what we call the border wars that actually brought the freedom to South Africa, unlike the perception of most people that South Africa was liberated by sanctions only or by people in South Africa protesting. It was actually the apartheid government was actually brought down by wars that were fought by countries like Zimbabwe, Angola, and Mozambique. Those wars angered the West, but they also, again, took money out of our countries, Zimbabwe and other Central African countries included. So imagine you've got the colonial debt, colonial underdevelopment, you start trying to develop your country, South Africa starts attacking you, you're forced to defend yourself from South Africa, you buy weapons, you spend money. Southern African countries spend $120 billion to liberate South Africa and to protect themselves from the apartheid government. And that was another set of sanctions. And the money that they had to use to buy the weapons to defend themselves from South Africa, and while developing their countries, building schools and hospitals and roads, actually became what came a structural adjustment program in countries like Zimbabwe, further put sanctions on the Zimbabwean people, further deindustrialized the country, and led us into more debt. That debt, that underdevelopment is what brings us to 2001, where we now have Western sanctions that are based on the West saying, you are unable to pay your debts to the IMF. Debts that included the colonial debt, debts that included loans we had to take to pay the colonial debt, and debts that included us having to buy equipment and weapons to defend ourselves from an invasion of the South African apartheid government that was supported by the West. It was all orchestrated. It was all designed. And all these were sanctions on Zimbabwe and other Central SADC countries, and we didn't realize that. When we get to 2000, and they impose their sanctions. The first sanctions they impose are called Zidera, and they deny Zimbabwe more loans from the IMF and multilateral lending institutions that were promised when we negotiated our independence to the Zimbabwean government to rebuild and reconstruct the country from colonialism and the war. So we now denied those loans. We're also denied another set of debt cancellation that we were promised, because remember, we got independence. We won our independence by the gun, but we also wanted the right to get reparations. And the West said, nah, reparations, no, but we might agree to canceling your debts in future. So you will develop your country, you get loans from the World Bank and the IMF, build up your country to be a better country, and then we would take away those debts, cancel them, and that's equivalent to reparations. So many African leaders, including many African countries, including the countries in the North, also accepted this situation where they never asked for reparations for colonialism. And what this did is it left us on a back foot. We didn't learn from the Jews who canceled their debts and asked for reparations that today are up to $100 billion that they've gotten for just 5 years of occupation by the Germans. Our African leaders didn't understand the importance. So that's why we're always in this perpetual debt trap. Because where we were supposed to be grown, to be moved out of the position we were during colonialism, the underdevelopment of colonialism through reparations, we didn't receive reparations, and we instead tried to close that gap by getting loans from the West. And those loans have created more debt. And Zimbabwean sanctions were hinged especially on the deprival of this debt that we're supposed to use to grow ourselves out of the colonial underdevelopment and the wars we fought to liberate ourselves, and to deny us the debt cancellation that is required for African countries to get out of the debt trap, which is deliberately created by our colonizers to keep us colonized.
Wow, Rutendo Benson Matinyarare. I think this is why we love you so much, because the way you explained it, like no one is going to be ever confused anymore about what is happening and how it's happening. And the way you explained it, it reminds me of the case of Haiti. Haiti, which was the very first Black nation to liberate itself, to end slavery. Slavery was ended by Haiti, in Haiti by Haitians, and they fought against one of the most powerful armies of the time, the French, the Napoleon army. And then once Haiti won against enslavement and won the independence, what did the Europeans do? They put a debt on Haiti, on Haiti's head, and they say, because you liberated yourself, we have lost money, because we take you as capital, as a product, as wealth. And since you have decided to be independent and sovereign, you have stolen that wealth from us. You liberating yourself is stealing wealth from us. So you owe us money. So they put a debt over people for liberating themselves because they see them as products. 100%. So now they've lost their products. So it sounds like this is exactly what happens and what has been going on in Africa. And in the case of Zimbabwe, it's like, how dare you liberate yourself? Now you owe us because we were going to become billionaires. We're not going to become billionaires anymore. How are we going to make money? You still owe us. Oh my goodness, this is madness. This is madness. And then so new generation now has to inherit this situation. If they don't know how to deal with it, they're told, oh, you see, you're nobody, you're lazy, you can't manage your country, you're backward, you're good for nothing. So let us take you over. Let the Chinese take over, let the Europeans take over, because Africans can't do nothing. Oh my goodness. Oh, wow, this is what it is. This is what it is. Okay, so this brings us into, what are we doing? What are Africans doing? And what do you need from the international African community, as we were saying specifically for this show? How can people invest in Africa, Africans investing in Africa and making sure that the land stays Black African and that it benefits first and foremost original First Nations Africans? What can people do? What are the opportunities? And are these opportunities helping Zimbabwe, South Africa, Africans to stay independent, to stay sovereign as we want to be? Please, let's get into that. Thank you so much.
That's a very good question. And before I can answer that question, it then brings me to a leg of the discussion that I didn't bring up in my summary, where you also need to understand that so Zimbabwe gets into trouble, gets under sanctions for the role it played to liberate itself, the role it played to liberate South Africa, the role it played to educate its people, who then began to demand the control of their land, the control of their resources. But there is a very fundamental debate that can't be left out here, in that by Zimbabwe self-determining, it made a choice to say that it was also going to play a role to liberate other African countries or to empower other African countries to ensure self-determination. And so this is why you saw that when the apartheid government began to destabilize, it did not destabilize Zimbabwe directly. It actually went to try and stop Zimbabwe's neighbors like Mozambique and Angola from supporting liberation fighters from South Africa. So they put in rebels, they gave weapons together with the CIA, and Zimbabwe played a role to destabilize that in Mozambique and in Angola. And as we would know, in Angola, there was a man who was causing the civil war in that country since 1975. That man was called Jonas Savimbi. Zimbabwean special forces were sent through to Angola to go and eliminate Jonas Savimbi in 2001. But what is interesting is that the Zimbabwean soldiers sent to go and neutralize Jonas Savimbi in Angola were actually coming from Congo, where there was another conflict that included Rwanda, Uganda, Burundi invading Congo with the intention of removing Laurent Kabila and replacing Laurent Kabila with a leader that would have been much more friendlier to the West. And the problem had been that Laurent Kabila was assisted to remove Mobutu Sese Seko by Rwanda and Uganda together with Burundi. And when they assisted him, they had expected that when he takes over the country, he would, number one, be more friendly to Western investment, and he would put Rwandan and Ugandan leaders into his government to influence Congolese policy. And when Laurent Kabila refused to do that, the Rwandans under Kagame decided we're going to get rid of him. We put him there, so we're going to remove him. Museveni felt the same. And when that happened, Congo being part of SADC, came to other SADC countries which had something that is called the SADC organ that is for cooperation and defense. And he said, my country is under invasion by foreign forces, and the organ says that once a member of SADC is attacked, then you guys will come to the defense of that country. So a fact-finding mission from SADC countries was sent, and the SADC countries like South Africa, which was and still is very much under white control, decided not to come. One, because they did not want to clash with the West, who they knew were behind Rwanda and Uganda, but also because they had their own issue where they had just invaded Swaziland after a coup in Swaziland, and Swaziland is inside South Africa, and South Africa felt the need to stabilize that. So they couldn't come on this fact-finding mission. Angola, Namibia, and Zimbabwe decided to go on a fact-finding mission, went into Uganda, Rwanda, Congo, and found out the circumstances that Kabila was going to be removed. And after he was removed, there was already a UN proposal to say Congo is a dysfunctional country, it's a failed state, let us divide it into 5 separate countries, part of which will be controlled by Rwanda, part of which will be controlled by Uganda, part of which will be controlled by Congo and Burundi, but at the end of the day, still friendly to Western pillage of that particular country. So Zimbabwe goes in there with Namibia and Angola, and they stop the removal of Laurent Kabila. They then force all the parties to then accept a secondary proposal, which was that the parties would come, sit down, have peace, and try and see how they can resolve the issues in an accord that was called the Sun City Accord. Sun City Accord came out of negotiations in Zambia, Lusaka Accord, something that was done in Botswana, until peace came and Congo wasn't divided. But I think we all know that there's still problems in Congo today. But as the International Court of Justice has just decided that Uganda owes Congo reparations, I understand that the lawsuit which Claude was the gentleman that was here just a moment ago, was instrumental in also undertaking. We understand that litigation on Rwanda was reserved. So Congo decided that, okay, we're not going to sue Rwanda, but we're going to take Uganda, and they got a settlement. That goes to show that the other countries were wrong. Zimbabwe sanctions were partially because of that role that they played in there. And this goes to your question in that I'm trying to say that African countries must defend each other. African countries must stand together to fight against imperialism. And imperialism is not about who necessarily you fight, but what is the objective and what is the ideology that you are fighting, or the objectives that you're fighting. So in Zimbabwe's case, there were clashes between Zimbabwe, Uganda, Angola, and Namibia against imperialists who had decided to use certain states in Africa to destroy and balkanize another country in Africa. And so that is an ideology that is part and parcel of what we're supposed to do. We're not only supposed to defend each other from military invasion, we're supposed to defend each other from droughts, we're supposed to defend each other from economic problems, we're supposed to defend each other from the economic sanctions and economic warfare that are on countries imposed by the West. And this, of course, is against international law. It is against a law that was made in 1989 that is called 44-215 that prohibits Western powers, former colonizers, from colonizing their former colonies in order to try and run their policies or determine their policies or coerce under duress their government policies, because then that takes away democracy from those African countries and essentially turns them into colonies again. Another thing, is we must become one Africa. And I know that Paul Kagame has been an advocate for this one Africa, Africa free trade, continental free trade area. We need to do that. But while we're doing it, we need to ensure that when we are doing it, we are doing it with the spirit of African oneness and not a Western African oneness that gives Western countries an advantage on neocolonialism in Africa and utilizing leaders that already are trained in the West to be instruments of the West to drive the Western agenda. So right now, on the issue of Kagame, my judgment is a bit reserved. I'm not too sure if Kagame is still the instrument of the West, trained at Fort Leavenworth to advance American interest, and now put into the French Afrique countries as a leader. I know that the former foreign minister is now the leader of that particular bloc. Are they still serving the agenda of France Afrique and the Westerners? Or is Kagame changing and transforming and becoming a leader who wants to see a united Africa? I'm not too sure. I know that they've mended up, they fixed their relationship with Zimbabwe. Museveni and Zimbabwe fixed their relationship too. Museveni even supported Zimbabwe in their war in Sudan when the UN decided to dump the Zimbabweans there while they were defending civilians. But we need to make sure that whoever is going to join hands with other African countries and lead that process is a leader that is above board and a Pan-Africanist at heart, who is not serving any other interests but the interests of Africa. And I think in Africa right now, we've got problems. People like Moussa Faki are seen to be serving the agenda of the French. The security apparatus at the AU is seen to be infiltrated by the West. And infiltrated by the French in particular. And we need leaders that are above board and beyond this kind of manipulation for us to take Africa forward. When countries like Zimbabwe, which are very central to the African Revolution, because they've gone on not only to fight Europeans and defeat them, they've gone on to help other countries to do that. More importantly, they've gone to take land and property rights and mineral rights to give them to their people. Many African countries still have to do the same. France Afrique has to be dismantled and the resources of France Afrique given to the people of those 14 African nations. And even African countries that are not within France Afrique still have to decolonize, give the property rights to their people. Countries like South Africa still have 92% of the economy controlled and owned by the former colonizer and Indians. And Namibia too is in the situation, Botswana. So we need to change that. And it so happens that the countries that are still under this form of colonialism, like South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana, are the most unequal societies on the African continent, which feeds back to that other issue you brought up where you were asking who are the unhappiest countries. South Africa has the highest murder rate, highest rape rate, highest suicide rate in Africa, highest disease burden from HIV, the most unequal society in the world. We need to correct those discrepancies, which are a factor of capitalism that was created by primitive accumulation, which essentially flourishes of taking the control of factors of production from the people and putting it into the hands of a few who, in this case, are all European and bankers who then exploit the people because they've got no other way to survive but to give their labor and to be slaves to the system. We need to end that in Africa. We need to do that together.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what is the role that you see the African diaspora playing, and where do you need them to play this role? And what are the industries in Zimbabwe which would use could use the help that people can see these opportunities and come and be the ones in charge of these opportunities?
Right. So the central crux of the fight that is in Africa is the central crux of the fight that is in Africa. So I mean in Zimbabwe. The reason why Zimbabwe is under sanctions is because Zimbabwe decided to give its people control of its land, give its people control of its factors of production. So in Zimbabwe, the biggest miners of gold in Zimbabwe are actually Zimbabweans. And they're not wealthy Zimbabweans, but normal Zimbabweans, artisanal miners, have access to mining rights in Zimbabwe. So protecting and defending that which they are attacking with the sanctions is the very first thing that every other African country has to do. And to do that, in Zimbabwe, for instance, we have to start by creating the legal precedents to defend the right of Black people to control their factors of production or their property rights. One of the things that Zimbabwe did when it began to clash with the West was to change the international custom on property ownership from being a white right, a white prerogative, to being a Black right by us taking factors of production that Africans lost during colonialism, giving them back to Black people, and recreating international custom to say Africans and Black people have, one, a right to be restored to what they had before colonialism, number two, a right to property rights. That is one of the things that Mugabe did internationally through international law by just what Zimbabwe did by taking land. We have to protect that. And to protect that means that the sanctions that have been imposed on Zimbabwe, we must all unite as Africans to fight that illegal precedence of punishing people collectively for taking back their land and punishing people collectively for going to defend African countries whose resources are under threat by former colonizers and other countries that are proxies of those former colonizers. So we must defend that right. And we must defend that right legally to institute and reinforce this legal act or legal precedence that was set or legal custom that was set by us taking our land. And that means when we go to the courts, like now we're in the South African courts, because South Africa is our biggest trading partner of Zimbabwe. Its financial institutions are the biggest enforcers of sanctions on Zimbabwe outside the United States, because their banks will deny Zimbabweans loans. It will deny certain Zimbabweans even bank accounts or transactions or payment clearances because they're enforcing American sanctions. They say they're enforcing those sanctions because they fear penalties or are complying to the US sanctions because they don't want to be on the wrong side of the United States. But we think that they're employing these sanctions or implementing these sanctions, complying with these sanctions because of white supremacy and trying to defend and to effect what it is the Americans are trying to effect, which is punishment of the Zimbabwean people so that they can fail to build Zimbabwe in order so that they bring back Europeans, which is what you said, reinstitute colonialism after we've suffered enough from sanctions. So we must stop those sanctions from biting not only Zimbabwe, but any other African country that's got sanctions because they are designed to do the same thing. Then Africans must join us in our legal action. In South Africa, the legal action we're going to take up in other trading partners on the African continent where banks and financial institutions controlled by Europeans in those countries are also instituting these sanctions, and until we go to the African courts and the International Court of Justice. One of the business opportunities that is there is that the legal court action that we're undertaking seeks reparations as is empowered by the UN Human Rights Council's resolution 3413 that says that any country that is under sanctions has got the right to seek reparations, to seek compensation, and to seek damages because unilateral sanctions imposed outside the UN by individual nations are illegal. They should be resisted, they should be mitigated, and other countries should not implement them, and people must seek reparations for them. So there's opportunity for law firms. There's opportunity for African companies that have been denied opportunity to come into Zimbabwe. There's opportunity for American companies, Canadian companies, British companies, European companies, and companies from all across the world that could not invest in Zimbabwe because they were kept out by illegal US sanctions. So there are law firms that can help companies litigate. Companies themselves that have been denied opportunity to come into Zimbabwe can litigate and ask for damages from the Americans, the British, and the Europeans who instituted these illegal sanctions for compensation for being kept out of Zimbabwe. Those who lost out in opportunities, Zimbabwe is the second biggest country with the country with the second biggest reserves of platinum, and the biggest country with the biggest reserves of lithium in Africa, and we've also got chrome, cobalt, anyway, I've forgotten the other one, nickel. So all these are resources of the future. Nickel is what is used in lithium carbon batteries. And so they're actually nickel carbon batteries. And many nations have lost out. Many investors have lost out. And we're saying these are opportunities that now as Africans, African Americans, African diaspora, if you've got money, come in and invest in those. Come in as groups, come in as consortiums, put your money together, come and control those resources, get the mining rights, get the concessions, get the claims, control them. So that one day when the investors from China, from Europe begin to come in, they're coming into resources that are already owned and controlled by Africans, and you can then have a part and a stake in their investments and begin to have technology transfer and sequential technology transfer in the process. We can do the same in gold. Zimbabwe has got some of the highest gold reserves per square kilometer in the world. And these resources are accessible to Zimbabweans. Zimbabweans who are accessing these resources, who are mining this gold, are in need of capital. They're in need of machinery. They're in need of capital. They're in need of technology. They're in need of investment. And so before the Europeans come and invest, while Zimbabwean artisanal miners are the biggest miners of gold in Zimbabwe at the present moment, come and join them. And remember, it wasn't always like this. It is because of the sanctions and the movement of capital from Zimbabwe, the movement of white capital from Zimbabwe to sabotage the country under sanctions, that Zimbabweans became the biggest gold miners in Zimbabwe. And there's actually a good story that the one company that was the biggest single company that was mining gold was actually a company from a guy called Mziko of Medalon from South Africa. So we actually created an economy that is totally different to anything else that you get on the African continent, where Black Africans have got the companies and the institutions that are the biggest miners of resources in Zimbabwe, unlike the rest of Africa, where all the resources are being mined by Westerners. And so I'm saying this is the time for African Americans, Canadian Americans, European Americans, Africans, Canadian Africans, European Africans, Africans, and Zimbabweans as well can come and invest in Zimbabwe. And Zimbabwe is open for business. And usually that term is used to say it's open for business for the West and the Chinese to come and do business in Zimbabwe. I'm saying it's open for business for Africans to come and do business in Zimbabwe. And we've already done it. I told you about the biggest gold miner being a South African company that is a single company in size. We've now got a Zimbabwean now that's owning the same mines that guy used to own. And this Zimbabwean billionaire is controlling a lot of mines in Zimbabwe. But we want Ugandans, we want Congolese, we want Nigerians, we want rich people from all across the continent to come and also control stakes of Zimbabwe and understand that they're free to do it. And the sanctions that are currently scaring people, we now have got strategies and legal procedures to mitigate them and get people licenses to do business in Zimbabwe without any complications. Next area, agriculture. Agriculture is currently utilized in Africa. We're under capacity, where 65% of our arable land is not being used. And we need to start using that land. And Africa must specialize only in one thing: organic food. No GMOs, no chemicals, no fertilizers. The world needs healthy food, and Africa can become specialists on producing this healthy food, where we control our seeds. We don't turn them into hybrids or GMOs from the Americans, British, Swiss. And we also produce our own organic seeds, organic fertilizers, to actually feed Africa and the rest of the world on quality food. If we can do that, we will take over the food industry of the world and make so much money that will then catalyze and capitalize other sectors of reindustrialization of Africa, to process our resources, to manufacture our own products, and to do what it is that the Western world does not want us to do, and to create the financial institutions of the African continent that can then finance our development and our infrastructure.
That is so beautiful, because food is so expensive, and then the more organic, the more natural that the food is, the more expensive that it is. So if Africa specializes in natural organic food, then they'll definitely be the richest agricultural people out there. So in terms of investing coming for the mining and the agriculture, people are wondering about the security and the stability and the sustainability of Zimbabwe, the political system. How is that going? How is the current president? What can you tell us about this picture? Zimbabwe's engine and sanction buster. Are the people in Zimbabwe happy with the government that replaced Mugabe? And in terms of security for the investors, how safe is Zimbabwe, and what are the certain guarantees that the government gives to people who may be coming to invest in Zimbabwe?
The picture that you showed is very interesting because the gentleman that is holding our president's hand is actually the gentleman who owns now the biggest mines in the country. He's a Zimbabwean, he's black, self-funded. He is the one who ended our fuel shortages in Zimbabwe by actually maintaining and reclaiming the use of the Zimbabwean pipeline to bring fuel into Zimbabwe and to actually look for partners who could sell fuel to Zimbabwe at a time where most countries would not sell fuel to Zimbabwe because of sanctions. So that is a man that I respect a lot. His name is Kudata Gwire. He's the biggest investor in Zimbabwe. He has invested in mining, agriculture, banking, insurance, almost every sector in the business and fuel. So he is an example of the fact that businesses in Zimbabwe can grow. He started his business with $50,000 after being retrenched in 2002. Having been retrenched, he looked to himself and was sitting in a fuel queue in which they were waiting for hours, sometimes days waiting for fuel because the Western fuel companies had pulled out of Zimbabwe. And while he was sitting in this queue, he said, "Are you telling me that we as Zimbabwean men and women, you're sitting with his wife, can't get ourselves our own fuel? We can't go to the Middle East, get fuel and bring it to Zimbabwe." And that dream in 2002 is what made him create the biggest fuel company in Zimbabwe. And he has become one of the biggest fuel traders in Africa, that he was invited to come and sit on the World Economic Forum. Now, I know I've got issues with that forum, but the fact that they recognized him and felt that let him come and sit on our forum illustrates that he did something well. And from 50,000 US dollars, he turned himself into a billionaire and the biggest fuel mogul who moves over 120 million liters of fuel every single year into Zimbabwe. Plus, he moves other petroleum products. Plus, he's in mining, he's in gold, he's in platinum, he's in nickel, he's in lithium. You can see where we're going with this. So what I'm trying to say to you is, if he can do it, you can do it. If a South African could come into South Africa to be a miner of gold, and now those gold mines have now been bought by this gentleman because the South African gentleman began tax evasion, began not paying his taxes, and so he owed the Zimbabwean government quite a bit. And then that's when this gentleman called Kuda bought those businesses through a company that is called Sakunda, which is the name of his wife, Sandra and Kuda, just to show you. So if women, Sandra's wife, Kuda's wife, is a woman who's created a billionaire and a billionaire in her own right because of doing business only in Zimbabwe. And the secret was they invested in Zimbabwe when no one else wanted to invest. They kept their money in Zimbabwe. They reinvested it in sectors where people had need. People were queuing for fuel. So if they could provide the fuel, they would make money. And once they made that money, they could sell their fuel in US dollars, in Zimbabwe dollars, in whatever currency they want. And that way, they would preserve the value of their currency, even though the Zimbabwe dollar is being attacked by sanctions. From there, they went into food. If people are hungry, if people are importing food, why not produce the food locally? Why not provide the fertilizers, the seeds, and everything that people need and make it easier to farm? If Zimbabwe cannot get loans from the international community, if the government cannot get loans from the international community to give its people fuel, to give its people medicine, to give its people things, they decided that we made so much money, why don't we lend this money to the government of Zimbabwe? The government of Zimbabwe assures the return of that money with guarantees. So why not do that? And that's what we will say. Anybody else that wants to come into Zimbabwe, you've got an opportunity to make money. And I think you also know one of the biggest telecom moguls in Africa is a guy called Strive Masiwa. He's also a Zimbabwean. He's organically built. He made his money in Zimbabwe to then be able to set out cellular networks throughout the world. And now he's got the biggest fiber company in Africa called Liquid Telecom. He's a Zimbabwean, brought up in Zimbabwe, and his businesses and money was built in Zimbabwe. So if that's possible, anybody else, everybody else can do the same. And so how will you be safeguarded? There will be risks coming into Zimbabwe, like risks of going into any other country. But what you're guaranteed in Zimbabwe is high returns, quick returns, and if you reinvest, more money to be made. This gentleman I just showed you, he controls a pipeline that takes fuel into Zimbabwe. That pipeline carries 165 million liters of fuel. He's using 120 million liters. So there's 40 million liters of fuel that still needs to come into Zimbabwe. And anybody with an appetite for fuel business and wants to invest money, about $20 million every single month, plus the rates that you pay for your fuel going down the pipeline, you can make a lot of money in Zimbabwe. And these are opportunities open to Zimbabweans, to foreigners, to Africans. And then, of course, the mineral resources that I keep telling you about. You can invest in minerals. You will never go wrong because you come in with paper money from America, paper money from Canada, paper money from Europe. That paper money is then turned into more money once you invest it into real wealth, which is the gold, the platinum, the lithium, the uranium, and the resources of the future of the world. Zimbabwe has just discovered gas, it's just discovered oil. That oil, if you can take your papers, put them into oil, you've got real wealth that will always maintain its value because oil will always be needed for a long time to come. We've got some of the biggest iron ore deposits, lime deposits, chrome deposits. So that means that we're a potential steel making country. And with South Africa, which was the biggest steel producer in Africa, having run out of iron ore, having run out of coking coal, Zimbabwe is the opportunity for people to take up, but it takes men and women with vision to actually go in now, begin to invest now, before we remove sanctions. My institution, Zimbabwe Sanctions, Anti-Sanctions Movement, are about to remove the sanctions. And sometimes I'm conflicted whether to remove the sanctions or to give people more opportunity for Black people to control all sectors of the economy and monopolize every resource before we open up by removing sanctions and letting the world come in and begin to compete with us. And if we're not careful, then the capital will overrun our countries, take over everything because they've got the money. So I would like Africans to control everything before the sanctions are gone and before competition comes in, so that when the competition comes in, you're already controlling that which you can sell and trade to partners and partner people for shareholding into the future businesses that will be in Zimbabwe.
So I hear what I'm hearing is that there are some positive unintended consequences to the sanctions, which is that it allows then Africans to take charge of themselves and take over all these things. And then by the time that they finish, that we may actually want to make these people who put on the sanctions on Zimbabwe to be like, oh, okay, sanctions are a mistake. It's actually doing the opposite reaction. People are taking charge. Let's, take off the sanctions, So when we're here in Canada, what people know is Robert Mugabe, when you speak about Zimbabwe, some people don't even know that he's gone. They still think that Mugabe is alive and he's ruling over Zimbabwe. And so what is the legacy of Zimbabwe to Zimbabweans? Because sometimes we're under the impression that Mugabe is really hated. Like I met a British lady here in Vancouver, Canada, and she told me that she used to live in Zimbabwe. She was a British lady. She had a farm. And then she says that she hates Mugabe so much, and she can only go back to Zimbabwe when Mugabe is no longer there. And then so I asked her, like, so why do you hate him so much? And then she said that she hates him so much because he took land from white people and gave it to Africans. And then so I asked this British lady, I'm like, so why is it that when Mugabe took land from you and gave it to Africans, why is it that you came to Canada? Why is it that you did not go back to England or the UK and look for land in England, have land in England, so that you can continue your agriculture activities in England, in your own home country of England, right? And then you know what she tells me? She tells me that in England, it's only the aristocracy and the monarchy which owns land. The queen and the lords, they own all the land, and the regular people like her can't have land, can't own land in England. So there was no point for her to go back to England. And she hates the weather, she hates how it is. She loves Vancouver more because it's not as bad as the rest of Canada, which is always snowing. So I was like, okay, so how come you don't hate the Queen of England? You don't hate all the lords, all the British aristocracy, which own all the land. You're not wishing them to die before you ever go back to England. But here you are in Canada. You're telling me that you hate Mugabe because he took land from you and gave it to Africans, but you are at the same time telling me that your queen and the aristocracy in England owns land. So why is it that you feel entitled to own land in Africa? And when the leader of of an African country says you can't own land in Africa, this land is reserved for African people, you hate him so much and you wish him to die. And you may even go into some organizations that want him dead, but you don't hate your queen so much. You don't wish her to die. You don't participate in any organization to make sure that the royal family dies because they own all the land in Europe, but you're willing to hate this African man, you wish him death, and you're willing to participate in organizations that kill him because he wants Africans to own land. Like, what is that about? So I don't know what you say to that. And I always wanted to know how do Zimbabweans feel about Mugabe, and what is the legacy, and how is this new generation seeing him? And then moving forward into the future, what has he done, and how this is going to affect the future, moving forward.
You ask a very interesting question, and whenever you tell this story, you told it last time when we had a program with Claude. I always love the story, the way you tell it, and the angles you bring out. Unfortunately for Zimbabwe, for Mugabe, there are many mixed feelings about Mugabe in Zimbabwe. There are people who love him immensely. There are people who are indifferent, and there are people who think that Mugabe actually did Zimbabwe a disservice. So the reason for that is that there's not enough information on this great leader. As Africans, sometimes one of the things that we are failing at is the failure to create knowledge, to pass down information, and to educate our people. And one thing that I have admired about the Rwandans is I've seen that you are creating information. Even where you don't have money, you create sites. I've seen websites that are just words, no images, no user interface, just words. The information is documented so that Rwandans in future can find this information. And it's something that Zimbabweans are about to start learning from you guys. Your history is being documented. Young Rwandans are interested in documenting, writing, making videos to communicate to future generations what is happening now, what happened in the past, and what it means. Zimbabweans haven't done that. And they haven't done that about Mugabe. And Mugabe himself failed to create enough biographies and information about himself before he died. We tried to get him to create an online museum that would create information and videos where he speaks his history for future generations and a reference point so that we wouldn't be told about Mugabe by the West. But we are being told about Mugabe by the West because the Mugabe family did not take advantage of creating information and a repository of that information while he was still alive. And one of the reasons I wanted Mugabe to create this repository of information is he could have given us insight into the lives of other leaders that he lived with and worked with. The Kwame Nkrumahs, the Machels, the Nyereres, and all the other leaders that he lived among, the Nassas. And we missed an opportunity. Fortunately, there are people like Kwame Nkrumah who wrote a lot of books. And I think maybe Kwame Nkrumah got opportunity to write books because he was removed by a coup and had enough time to write. But Mugabe stayed on in leadership longer, so he didn't have time to write books. But we've missed an opportunity, and we missed an opportunity to understand his psychology, because what he has done for the African is indicated by the dissonance that is still in white people who hate Mugabe for doing the opposite of what has been done by the West. So the West built capitalism by primitive accumulation, taking away factors of production from everybody so that those people cannot survive but only to be labor for capital. Mugabe decided that every human being must have the option of having land and factors of production. And if they decide to go and work because they don't want to work the land or because they don't want to take resources out of the ground, that'll be a choice or simply ignorance. So that is a reversal of the capitalist system. It's a recreation of or a reinstitution of the communalism that we used to have in Africa that used to make Africans not want to work for Europeans when they first got in Africa because they had cows, they had land, they had resources, they could survive, they didn't need to go to work. And when the Europeans tried to force them to go to work, they refused to go to work. It's only when Europeans started taking the land, started taking the resources, that Black people were forced to go to work and being taxed, poll tax and head tax, that they began to go to work out of fear of starving and the fear of being jailed for not paying taxes. Mugabe reversed that. And that legacy will be long lasting because it is a reversal of a law that was created by the Europeans in 1453, known as the Discovery Law, that gave Europeans the right to go and control the properties of all peoples and non-Christian peoples across the world. Mugabe then came and took away that right that the Europeans had given themselves in 1453 to control factors of production, to control resources, and to control wealth, and to call property rights that which is owned by Europeans. Mugabe reinstituted the word that property rights also mean that which Africans and natives own, and they would obviously own the most richest resources in the world, because that's our property. It is the richest and best resources in the world. That lady that you were speaking to has still not gotten around to understand that the property she was holding was not hers. It was stolen property. And Mugabe restored the people that her ancestors stole the land from. She still couldn't get into understanding that she must go to Europe and fight the battle with her queens and her aristocrats to get land, but she will not get land in Africa anymore because we will fight her to take our land back because it is our property rights and not hers. She's lucky that Mugabe didn't charge her damages, reparations, and ask her to return all the unjust enrichment she benefited from that land, because these are the principles that should have been instituted when that land was taken. And so what Robert Mugabe did for us as Zimbabweans was an endowment and a gift and an inheritance to the whole of Africa and all Black peoples and non-white peoples all across the world, including the Inuits in Canada, including the American Indians in America, including the Aboriginals in Australia. And that is the reason he was hated by the West. It is because he was creating a precedence that all those that have lost their property to theft or colonialism must take back what belongs to them, and they must own it as it is their property and not the rights of the criminals and the thieves that are controlling them. And if you understand, the biggest countries that hated Mugabe the most are the countries that are still colonizers today. The United States, still colonizing Indian land, still keeping Indians in reserves away from their property. The Canada, still the property of the Queen, under this decree of discovery that I'm telling you. Queen of England still controls Canada, and the Canadian Prime Minister and his cabinet still pay allegiance to the Queen of England on the basis of inheriting property and control of land that doesn't belong to them through a colonial system of the discovery law. Australia is the same thing. And until we restore, and I think Norway, Sweden, some of those, Denmark, they're also colonizers of European territory that was actually controlled by Indians. So we believe that Mugabe left us the right and the principle and practice and the custom that Africans have property, must take back their property, must control their property, and mustn't be apologetic about that. And Europeans still haven't learned that. We need to make them understand that.
Very interesting. So you are in South Africa. How is this in relation to South Africa and how South Africa is right now? And how do you see the South African system? We hear about Malema, the Economic Freedom Front. Do you think it's a good idea? And the stability of the entire Southern Africa region may also depend on the stability of Zimbabwe and South Africa. How do you see moving forward in the future? Do you think these regions will be stable, or they will be unstable precisely because of the injustice and the inequalities that exist in the South African society?
South Africa is an interesting case study because white monopoly still holds strong here, and they control people in South Africa through two things: the media, which is an occupation of the minds of the South African people. It teaches them how to think, it directs them how to reason, it directs them on their ideologies and aspirations, and it has generally built a distaste for what happened in Zimbabwe, makes a lot of people fear to take their property from whites because they feel that once they take their property from whites, black people are not able to manage. South Africa will become a Zimbabwe. And you have to understand that this is people judging Zimbabwe not from Zimbabwe, but they're judging Zimbabwe from what they hear from the white media that wants to discourage them from taking back black property rights. They also are being taught consumerism. They need to keep consuming. They need to continue aspiring to own things that they buy and not to own factors of production or not to own the resources and the wealth of the nation. And this is what the media does to the people. There is the other system, of course, is controlling the factors of production, meaning that the whites and the former colonizers control how you feed yourself, how you eat, and how people are able to survive. So they're the ones that hold the paycheck, they're the ones that hold the salaries, obviously from wealth created from the crime against humanity that they committed upon the South African people, which is colonialism and apartheid. For that reason, they've created institutions and people like the Julius Malemas of this world who are actually being paid by the same colonizers to be in parliament, to receive high salaries that indirectly make them maintain the system if they want to maintain the high salaries that they get from their parliament. And South Africa is one of the highest paid parliaments in the world, and it was done deliberately by the former colonizers to co-opt the black politicians, the black parliamentarians, and the black lawmakers to protect the system so that they can be able to protect their own lifestyles that are mimicking those of the former colonizers and those of the people that continue to hold the wealth of South Africa. So essentially, Julius Malema is one of those people that are actually in bed with the colonizer in the aspect that he's a parliamentarian who receives a high salary from the insurance, from the taxes that are paid by these companies. And for him to maintain those high salaries, they've got to maintain the status quo. And in many extents, he has the right rhetoric. He says the right words. He talks about Pan-Africanism, a lot of which he learned from people like us who were talking about it for a very long time, but in reality doesn't mean it. he actually says it to pacify the South African people, to control and channel their anger from being a revolutionary anger into being an anger of aspiration, an anger of belief and faith that one day they will take the land. One day, Julius Malema will lead them to take what is theirs, but that day will never come because Julius Malema is just trying to keep himself in parliament and relevant for him to continue to get that salary together with all the other people that he has within his party. So what you will see is that Julius Malema has got mixed signals when it comes to his revolutionary talk, particularly on the revolutionary movements on the African continent. He will demean and demouth and decampaign revolutionary movements that have empowered their people already. He will decampaign Zimbabwe. He will propagate false information on the history of South Africa and how it got its liberation and the role played by other countries in its liberation, to continue to make South Africans feel that they are the only relevant country on the continent and everybody else is irrelevant. And if they are relevant, they're only relevant because South Africa makes them relevant, and South Africa is the one that is the savior of the rest of the continent. I believe that any revolutionary who advances such a narrative is a revolutionary or a false revolutionary. It's the same way that our leaders, if you know Kagame, Museveni, and the leaders of Southern Africa, all were trained in Tanzania to become liberation fighters. They were taught how to use guns there. Without them giving credit to Tanzania, we will never be true revolutionaries. Without them giving credit to Abdel Nasser of Egypt and other leaders on the African continent who were very instrumental, Kwame Nkrumah, in creating the revolutionary movements that freed Africa, then those people, without acknowledging those countries that made such a contribution to African independence, would not be true to the revolution if they take the credit and Zimbabwe starts to think that it has become the beacon of independence or beacon of liberation in Africa without giving credit to those that gave Zimbabwe its liberation. And I think that's what's happening in South Africa. And it's happening because the South Africans actually fear what happened in Zimbabwe. They fear the sanctions. They fear the isolation. They fear the suffering that comes when you're starting to take Black ownership of your own. They fear the backwardness, going backwards to learn how to do for yourself. They fear teaching themselves how to struggle to build their own. And so for that reason, they despise, they hate Zimbabwe, they hate the Zimbabwean revolution, they demonize the Zimbabwean revolution. But unfortunately for them, with resources getting finished, with the tax base getting eroded, they're going to be forced by the poor who starve, the poor who have to murder each other with the highest murder rate in Africa to survive. They're going to be forced to look at the land issue. They're going to be forced to undertake that land reform and to lose their comforts of high salaries, lose their comforts of driving Ferraris and Bentleys, so that they can make sure that the wealth of this country is divided among everybody to take the rest of the people in what is the richest country in Africa out of abject poverty that sometimes rivals poverty in some of the poorest African countries. And that day is coming because if they don't do it, we are going to see white parties, former apartheid type parties, ascend to power through coalitions. And once they do that, they'll consolidate white power in a legalized democracy in a way that is going to be difficult for Black people to try and take over that power by force, because then the rest of the world would intervene to protect a democratic government. And for them to stop that from happening, they're going to have to undertake land reform. They're going to have to go under sanctions unless they support the Zimbabwe sanctions fight now to create a precedent that will make it illegal and impossible for sanctions to be used on Africans again because of the penalties and the reparations that the West will have to pay to Zimbabwe now to stop them from using these means in future. But currently, we're not getting support from the South Africans. So chances are Zimbabwe will get its sanctions dealt with. And when Zimbabwe gets its sanctions dealt with, they might even be dealt with quicker because the Western world now needs to focus on South Africa, which now is left at a crossroads where they have to either take resources, take land, give it to their people, transform the economy, and face the consequences of doing that if the politicians are going to survive. And remember, if the whites come in, they will send a lot of these African leaders to jail for allegations of corruption so that they will not face competition in future. And faced with that, either you get arrested when the whites take over with coalition governments that hate other black people, or you take land. I think the choice is very clear, very obvious, and the path that South Africa is going to take is almost predictable.
That is so interesting, because it may actually seem like they don't want the Zimbabwe to influence South Africa. And this is why anyone in power in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, must demonize Zimbabwe and make sure that there's
Yes.
that division and that separation, because God forbid that the people in South Africa do what happened in Zimbabwe. So it appears as if actually for if they were looking 100 years in advance or 200 years in advance, what would benefit Zimbabwe more and even South Africa more would be for South Africa to side with Zimbabwe right now, because then they would benefit. They would suffer just a little bit temporarily, but not that much, because Zimbabwe is already in the process. But for the next 100 years and 200 years, they would actually be leading themselves towards their liberation and independence. So, what will it take for South Africa to realize this?
It's going to be difficult for South Africa to realize this because they shut down voices that give an alternative or give insights like the ones I'm giving. They won't give you an opportunity to say this. First of all, because of the neo xenophobia rising up, South Africans, or let's call it neo Afrophobia, young South African hatred for fellow Africans. So even if you want to have this kind of conversations on social media, they'll shut you down because they say, you're an African, what do you know? What you can't tell South Africa what to do. And within doing that, they close out the voices that are going to give them insights that could help them to make better decisions. And because they shut down voices that could help them to make better decisions, they're only left with the paid voices of people like Malema and the white voices, which are white voices are Malema's voice that is being used to try and curate the anger and curate the frustrations and aspirations of Africans. But at the end of the day, they will learn late if they don't begin to listen to those that have walked the road. And if they stop judging and saying, because you're a Zimbabwean, you know nothing, because if you knew something, your country would be better. They say that because they don't know that Zimbabwe is doing better, but it is also affected by sanctions. They think it's because of failure. They think it's because Black leadership is ignorant and incompetent and corrupt. And what we're trying to say to them is that your fight is going to be different from Zimbabwe. You are less of an agrarian society and more of an industrialized society. So the effects and impact of sanctions will be harsher, quicker, and more immediate. You do not own your own seeds. Your seeds are owned by Monsanto, they're owned by Syngenta, they're owned by Bayer. And because of that, you are going to find that you will not be able to produce even your own food for a season the moment that they put you under sanctions. So you will get land, you will own the land, but you won't own the seeds, you won't own the fertilizer. And once you don't have the land and the seeds and fertilizer, then you can't use the land. And it is at that point that South Africa will need the same African countries that it is showing hatred towards. And my fear is some of those African countries will not want to cooperate with a South Africa that is on a back foot, under sanctions, and not as powerful as it used to be. Another thing is that South Africa is highly indebted. Its resources are running out. And with resources running out, with high debt, what is going to happen is that it's not going to have money to undertake some of the transformation and changes that it's going to need if it goes under sanctions. The economy is totally controlled by white people. So they're going to cut them off from fuel. They're going to cut them off from electricity. They're going to cut them off from loans, unlike a Zimbabwe that actually had a bulk of its economy partially in Black hands, such that the transition was not so difficult. So I really fear for South Africa if they continue to hide their heads in the sand, if they continue to be xenophobic, if they continue to be driven by hatred, they are going to reap the results of hate, and that's going to be isolation with no friends, like the prodigal son, who ended up not having a single person to assist him in his crisis because he never cared to create relationships when he was supposed to. And this is where South Africa is going. And I believe that the Europeans and the white people that are creating these divisions between South Africa and the rest of Africa are doing it deliberately to isolate South Africa at the time where it decides to undertake what is an obvious change that is going to come. And there are going to be people like myself, the moderates, people that are real Pan-Africanists at heart, who are going to continue to say to Africa, irrespective of how South Africa treats Africans today, they will need our support tomorrow unconditionally. And we must remember that they are not the enemy. The enemy is white supremacy that sometimes fools our people to act in certain ways that are not their choosing, but influenced and indoctrinated behavior that we should not then hold against them tomorrow. So it's going to take a lot of understanding for us to get there. I mean, you look at Kagame has got issues with South Africa. They're not good friends. And these are some of the prominent countries that are going to be playing a central role in Africa's development tomorrow. So we have to start mending our mindsets today towards how we look at South Africa, how we believe, how we think or see how they act today, so that we don't use that as a means of not achieving Pan-Africanism tomorrow when they need our assistance and support.
That is very, very.
I'm just going to run and collect my. I'm going to run and collect my charger quickly. My battery is done here.
Okay, great. We'll be here. South Africa. Wow. This is very interesting because it appears as if South Africans, due to them suffering so much racism and white supremacy, are being taught to hate themselves and hate their fellow Africans. But then they don't have the energy to fight against the people who actually oppress them and kill them and genocide them and stole their land, precisely because they have been miseducated. Matinyarare, I was saying, like, maybe this is part of the South African programming, that they would be made to hate their fellow Africans who go to South Africa in peace, who are not even trying to kill them and take over their land. They have the energy to hate those Africans, but then they're distracted from facing the people who actually went to South Africa from Europe and other places and stole their land and killed their people, and now they own everything. So it's like instead of facing that bigger issue, that real fundamental issue which made you into the situation that you are, that they would be. Yes, I hear you perfectly.
Hello?
Yes, I perfectly hear you. I can hear you. It's looking good.
I'm struggling to hear you, sis.
Okay. Can you hear me better now?
Hello?
Yes, I'm perfectly hearing you. Everything is good on this side. Yep.
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Hear you. Yeah. Perfect. So I'm saying, like, maybe the South Africans hiding from a bigger issue by hating on their fellow Africans. They have this big, huge issue that they don't want to face, and the smaller issue that they want to face is their fellow Africans, and that's part of the miseducation, and the misinformation, that they would rather keep them busy looking at the fellow African who's coming in instead of looking at the bigger issue. I don't know if you got that. Okay.
I can't hear you. Your voice as I can't hear anything anymore.
Oh, wow. I don't know why. I don't know how that is. Mm, okay. Yeah. Yeah. So he's gonna try to reconnect. He's gonna try to reconnect. Okay, so the great lesson that I'm getting from this as we wait for Mr. Matinyarare to reconnect so we can conclude is for other African countries to be there for South Africa and for South Africans once they go into the liberation process. And another thing that I wanted to mention was because Mr. Matinyarari spoke a little bit about it, is the situation of Rwanda and land in Rwanda. In the case of Rwanda and Kagame, the way it's set up right now in Rwanda is that the government has taken away land from the people. Okay, let me add Mr. Matinyarari in the stream again. Welcome back. All right, I can see you
I could
perfectly.
you sounded like
Okay, perfect. So you're back. So let me tell you, I was going to tell you about the land situation in Rwanda so we can conclude about that to do a contrast. As you were saying, like, you don't know if Mr. Kagame is a Pan Africanist or not, but we can judge him through his action towards his own people, towards his own country. And what has happened in Rwanda is that his government, his regime, and this is something that started with his regime, this is something that did not exist back in the days in Rwanda, is that he took away the land from the people, and now the regime owns the land, and the people can't even cultivate what they want in their own land that they used to own, that they inherited from their ancestors. It has been stolen by the government, and now the government orders them what to cultivate in their own land. So they pretty much become slaves on the land of their ancestors. And if they dare cultivate something else to sustain themselves, because the government orders them what to cultivate according to the orders that they get from the international community, which supported them to get into power. So then the people are not even cultivating the land to feed themselves. You will find people starving despite the fact that they have land and a farm and they're cultivating. But even what they're cultivating, they cannot consume themselves. There's already markets set up by the regime. So the people work as slaves and then they produce for the market, and then they can't even afford to buy back some of these things that they sell on the market so that they can feed themselves and the children. And this has caused so much destabilization and hunger, and it's like also causing anger to build up, because it's like people know this is my land, this is my ancestors' land, I don't own it anymore. The government tells me what to cultivate, and now I can't even feed myself and feed my children on that. So what do you think, that if someone was really a Pan-Africanist and they really cared about African people, they would do this to their own people? Because sounds to me like this is the exact opposite of what has happened in Zimbabwe by Mugabe taking land and giving it back to the people, so that first and foremost in the African culture, the people have to be able to feed themselves, because the number one purpose is for the people not to starve living on a land that can give them food. Then once the people feed themselves, they can take the rest of what they have, their production, to the market and sell that. Now they can feed their children, send their children to school, and keep cultivating the land. But that's not how it is in Rwanda. People have become slaves and enslaved on their own land. So I don't know what you want to say about that, and then we will jump into the conclusion afterwards with your closing remarks.
The Rwandan story is rather sad in the aspect that I think Kagame knows the right thing to do, but he has made contracts and deals with the wrong people. I know that Kagame knows the right thing to do because he talks about the right things. Then he does something totally different. He talks that we shouldn't be indebted to the West. We shouldn't be addicted to Western debt. We shouldn't solve our problems through the West. But he's doing exactly that. I think there is a minister, there is a lady in Rwanda by the name of Agnes Kalibata. Agnes Kalibata is sitting on the World Food Program, and she has been the person that has endorsed AGRA, or Africa Greening Revolution Alliance, into Uganda, into Rwanda. And this AGRA has actually caused an increase of poverty by 30% among farmers in Rwanda because of precisely what it is that you've said. And I find what you said interesting, because you have given me a real life experience of a Rwandan, based what it is compared to what it is that is being said by media that has been critical about AGRA in the African continent. This Bill Melinda Gates Rockefeller institution that has brought commercial seeds and brought GMOs and brought chemicals into African farming, and the production of cash crops, the production of export crops that have taken away food self-sufficiency from African small-scale farmers and subsistence farmers who used to be able to grow food in mixed cropping and African cropping styles that used to give them food security. Now they don't have that food security by utilizing this westernized system brought by people like Agnes Kalibata, brought by AGRA, brought by UPOV, and this proliferation of Western biotech company products on the African continent at the detriment of Africa. And if you remember, when I started my conversation, I said that Zimbabwe was put in a debt trap after being incapacitated through the Morgenthau Plan or deindustrialization. Africans have one domain that they were left with to continue their self-sufficiency, and that was agriculture. And now Africans are giving over their agriculture to the West to incapacitate them by losing their seeds, losing their farming practices, losing the fertility of their soil, which is going to leave them very much dependent on Western seeds, Western products, Western capital to feed themselves. And this is sad that Rwanda is at the center of that case study and system. It is being used as the poster child that is being used to try and create this kind of scenario. And we need to reverse it. And my issue is, I've been a critic of Kagame, hoping to appeal to his senses, to say, you know the right thing to do. You are a military man. You're a soldier. You were trained on how to incapacitate. You were trained on how to destroy the self-sufficiency of an enemy. Isn't it time for you to use the same strategies to give Africa capacity to grow itself and to fight the West, in order, instead of incapacitating ourselves, to make ourselves vassals of the same colonizers who we fought for the past 60 years?
Yeah, so hopefully he will hear you. But I think the issue is, when you come to power, and these are the people that put you in power, and they maintain you in power despite the fact that you may not be supported by the majority. So as a minority government, and as someone who relies on the military in order to sustain themselves in power, then they need these Western countries, because they're the ones who are pretty much their base. If you're an African leader and your base is your African people, and they're the ones who put you in power because you had good policies and they voted you in power, then you care that these African people, what they think, because these are your base. But if you come into power through war, and your base is the colonizers, which give you the weapons to go into power, and they sustain you, then they're pretty much like the ones who elected you. So you work to please them. So I think he's stuck in that. He's stuck in that because his base is the Western colonial powers which put him in power. He depends on the military because democratically he cannot be elected since he's unpopular due to his policies on top of being a minority government, So he's kind of stuck there. But, if he had it in him to love the people, and if he had it in him to see 100 years in advance, he would see that it's in his best interest to leave the land to the people and to make the people self-sustained, because otherwise, where are his children going to live? His children are going to be slaves, and their grandchildren are going to be slaves, and they won't have any land. And then in a few years, they will be facing a revolution among Rwandans because they'll be like, we need our land back. Ultimately, Rwanda will have a land issue that it should have never had, because this land issue never existed. And it's not the colonial powers which brought the land issue to Rwanda. It's the person they put in power who brought the colonial land policy upon Rwandans. But ultimately, they will have this land issue because Rwandans will be starving when they have land.
And I think you guys in Rwanda have got the situation that we are trying to avoid in Zimbabwe, where when leaders are imposed on a people, particularly minority leaders. So you see Kagame got rid of Habyarimana. He got rid of Crispin Ntariamira, and he did that so that he could be in power, as you said, because he would never have been able to get a democratic selection by the people. And now you are struggling with a man that is serving minority interests and the interests of those that brought him into power. And we are saying in Zimbabwe as well that they're trying to do that not with war, but they are trying to do it now utilizing economic warfare that is going to incapacitate the government to also bring regime change for a minority people that are not loved by the people, that are not wanted by the people, but being imposed on the people. And that will lead us to the very same result you're talking about, where even if they come into power because of their use of economic warfare, in time they will be exposed, and when they're exposed, they'll be forced to hold on to power, and to hold on to that power, they have to do what we are seeing Kagame doing. He's killing people in Mozambique. He's killing activists all across the world. He's tricking activists to fly back home, hoping that they're going to another country, diverted in the air, landing in Rwanda, and then being arrested. And I hope that Kagame himself will be judged by his own words and his own condemnation of the West, his own condemnation of France. Because I find it weird that you condemn France, but at the same time he's in bed with the French. You know what I mean? It doesn't make sense. And now that your former foreign minister is now sitting at the head of France Afrique, and Rwanda which had separated itself from that movement, is now back in the fold, is actually very concerning. And we can only talk and hope that ultimately we will reach out to him to say, your role as a leader can still be changed and shifted if you do the right thing. If you begin to restore what it is that you've removed and taken away from your people, the land rights, the right to serve African interest over Western interest, the right to serve humanity before capitalism. I think we just need to keep talking, and hopefully one day he will hear. And what is so scary is that I'm such a critic of Kagame that I would love to visit Rwanda, but I will never dream of visiting Rwanda as long because he has said clearly that anybody that speaks against Rwanda, anybody that threatens Rwanda, no matter where you are, we will reach out for you. We will get you.
But you see, he confuses himself with Rwanda because you are not threatening Rwanda. And what you're saying can actually improve the lives of Rwanda. What you're saying is good for Rwanda. You are threatening the power of one man who
Yes.
is serving the interest of the oppressors, So it's like they hide behind the country, Rwanda, so that all Rwandans may feel concerned and defend him because defending the country Rwanda. But what they're doing is not even in the interest of the country Rwanda and the Rwandans. So you're doing a great service to Rwanda and the Rwandans by exposing their oppressors. You're doing a great service to Rwanda and the Rwandans by wanting us to be independent and free. But the politicians want to hide behind, oh, you're threatening Rwanda. No, 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 don't even stop. So let's end with this great picture of yours and this great quote, because it's exactly what you just said. The time is always right to do what is right. And it's not too late for all these people who are in position of leadership to do the right thing, so that no matter how much wrong they may have done in the past, if they can at least do one right thing before they leave power, it would be a great gift for the future generations. So coming to the conclusion, is there something that is important that you feel that the audience should know that you haven't spoken about? And then what is the best way to reach you if people want to be part of your movement? And what is your priority number one, where you want people to focus in helping you in your journey?
You know, one of the things that is the biggest problem for me with the issue that we're talking about is I find it very difficult to criticize Rwanda and its president, especially its president, because I've hardly seen a group of organized people like those, like your guys' leaders. You listen to your Minister of Justice speaking. He prepares before he goes in front of the camera. He knows how to speak. You listen to Kagame speaking, says the right things. All you can do is to be in awe. So you look at this Rwandan leadership. They've got an African excellence that you don't find in many other African countries. Articulate, organized. They say the right things. But there is this discrepancy of the issues of lack of democracy. And now for me, what affects me is I'm not a proponent of democracy. I'm a proponent of good leadership, African leadership that leads, not because it has been selected as the most popular, but because it leads and leads its people for the benefit of its people, and the results of what it is that they're doing are going to be seen. So when I talk of Rwanda, I have cognitive dissonance, because this excellence, this well-articulated, organized machine is making one fundamental mistake of serving the wrong master. And if it could only utilize this excellence to serve its people, it would be the example of Africa and example of all non-white peoples. This leaves me so confused, because there's elements of your guys' government that is so good, and elements of your guys' government that is so contrary to the African project. And I'm left not knowing what to do. But what I believe is that Ugandans and Rwandans, as an intellectual people, you need to take your position. You have intellect. There's something special about you. There's a leadership in you. There's a technicality. There's a attention to detail that you guys have that the rest of the continent doesn't have, that it could learn from you. And you've got to step up to play that role of organizing Africa. You know, in Europe, the Netherlands, when you travel by train from France to Netherlands, you pass through France, you pass through Belgium, and the moment you enter Netherlands, you can tell that you've entered a different country because of this, the way that the land is organized. They're very organized people. They're project managers. They make things look beautiful. And they have been in the center of organizing European finance, European trade for a very long time. Africa needs to now start doing the same. The Rwandan at the level of organization, attention to detail, need to take their role. While those that have the role of being revolutionaries to shake up the continent and shake up the imperialists need to take our role as the Zimbabweans, and everybody else needs to fall in place if Africa is going to move forward. And this is what I would appeal to people like Kagame to say, you've got so many good things about you. You need to just walk the talk, and walk the talk for Africa, and stop walking the talk for the rest of the world, for the Europeans and our enemies. You know what to say. Now act what you say, and unite your people by doing the right thing, giving the power to where it belongs. And if he decides to do that, then those people that have suffered under his lies and the genocide that is hidden should also forgive him, because I believe that he's got something to bring to the table, to the rest, to Rwanda and the rest of Africa, as long as he can focus on Africans rather than the master.
That's very interesting. I think it's something to do with the Rwandan culture, our culture. We are very organized in our culture, and we pride ourselves in being so intelligent and being capable of outsmarting the whole world. I think this is the role that Kagame has played as well, because from the Rwandan perspective, if you're capable of outsmarting the whole world, it means you're really brilliant, So the fact that he has been able to outsmart the whole world, that in itself is, something to celebrate in our culture. But we need to be able to outsmart the world, working for the benefit of Africa and Africans. We need, like you said, for Rwandan people to use our intelligence and our organizational capacity, and the fact that we're all around the world and we're capable of going into all these leadership positions. So we need Rwanda to work for Team Africa, and every Rwandan who has power and who is in a great position wherever they are in the world to be working for Team Africa. This is something great that you just said. I'm very conscious of this. And, I'm trying to use my platform in Canada to do exactly that, to work for Team Africa, because it's very rare for Africans, for an African individual to have their own show on television in Canada, which this show airs on television in Canada, on Sharp Television. And it's been like a challenge of us to be like, okay, we have to make sure that this show and this platform that we have serves Africa and brings stories that serve the interest of Africa to the Canadian audience, to the international audience. The thing that everything we do is educating and is serving the greater interest of Africa. So thank you so much for saying that. And I think this is a challenge that we need to do as Rwandans as well, because if we have so many intelligent people, and if we're so good at being organized and being clean and being great presenters, then it should be to benefit all Africa. Because ever since ancient times, the very first Europeans that came to Rwanda, when they came to Rwanda, this is something that astonished them. They were like, wow, this country is so beautiful, the people, and they're so organized, and everything is so in order, in point. This is from ancient times. Rwanda was always like that. It's in the Rwandan culture. It's something that is inbuilt within the Rwandan culture that makes people like that. So Kagame is typical Rwandan when it comes to that. Even the way the Kigali and Rwanda is clean as a country, this is something that is deeply ingrained in the Rwandan people, Rwandan women. If you go into a house and the house is not clean, spotless, then you know it's not a Rwandan house.
I mean, all you've got to do is listen to that Louise Mushikiwabo. I've never, ever heard a person that deals with the media like the way that Louise does. Imagine if Louise was doing that for Africa. And I understand that she was put into France Afrique specifically to neutralize the influence of Canada.
Yes.
Wow. That says something about her. For a Black African woman to be selected to neutralize the Canadians.
Yeah,
influence
because
in
the
Africa.
black woman who was there before was Canadian, but she has no influence on the African youth. But Rwanda, after building the brand Rwanda, will have more influence on the African youth if they put a Rwandan woman in there. She's not only African, but she's from Rwanda, and Rwanda is the story that they want to broadcast to the rest of Africa.
Wow.
So they then really, it's a hit for them. It's a hit for them. But like you said, we need Rwandans to be using all these skills and intelligence that they have for the benefit of Africa. This is how we win. So that if everyone, whatever greatness that you have in your country, if it's used to benefit Africa, all Africa benefits. So I thank you so much that your greatness and your outspokenness and your handsomeness and everything that you do, you're using it for Africa. This is how we move forward. This is so beautiful. Thank you so much. Is there any last words that you want to say before we let you go? I know it's really, really late where you are. Is there any last words you want to say before we let you go?
I just want to say Africa must be united, and the Great Lakes region is the heart of Africa. The Great Lakes region must heal, the Great Lakes region must unite, and the Great Lakes region must unite the rest of Africa. We need the Great Lakes region to join us in our fight as the heart of Africa to get a legal ruling against sanctions so that they don't continue to be used on the African continent. And we need smart Rwandan lawyers, smart lawyers from across Africa to join us in making sure that our fight in Zimbabwe becomes a continental fight, because it is a continental fight, and the precedents and custom we're going to build here legally is going to have repercussions for our children and our children's children until we build our own military capacity so that we can begin to fight intellectually, militarily, and otherwise for the world. And Africa needs to take its position in the world if the world is not going to go into extinction. Because as long as the world continues to develop along this Western trajectory, we're going to either destroy the world from pollution, destroy the world from degradation, destroy the world from depleting resources, or nuclear warfare. So Africa has got to take its place. We're not a war people. We are a people of peace. We need the peace. We need the way that we have got a relationship with nature to become the new way that the world exists. And I thank you, sister, for this wonderful time. I always love your intellectual output, and I like your aggression. Continue with it, and let's hope that we'll do another show again soon.
Absolutely.
And to the African people, thank you. Asante sana.
Asante sana, Matinyarare. Have a great evening. We'll see you again soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, sis.
All right. All right, my people, that's it. My Canadian people, check out Benson Matinyarare on Rutendo. He is so great. After this, there could be no confusion about what's going on in Zimbabwe. This is education, my people. This is information. When you are armed with the right education, right information, there is no way that you are not going to win, my people. All right, let me close this show, and then I'm going to go into Kenya, Rwanda, and speak to my Kenya, Rwanda people and see where we're at. If there's any comments, any questions, I'll answer them to my Kenya, Rwanda audience. Thank you so much for being here. And my English people, thank you so much for being here. So we're closing the show, and I'll go into the after show in our own African language of Rwanda, my people. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I love you all. I love you all. Thank you so much. Stay tuned if you want to learn one of the most ancient African languages on the planet, not to mention one of the most beautiful, most brilliant language that I speak, my people. All right. My people, mukomere cyane, turi kumwe. Ubwo rero nyine nje hano nyuma ya show gatoya kugira ngo mbaganirizeho gatoya, you know, and then nyine twikomereze nyine Friday night, abari muri Friday night aho muri hose mugire ibihe byiza. Nadine Kazuba, I see you, ebana Rutendo Matinyarare, ebana namumenye, thank you so much kubera wowe na Claude, ibwo noneho namubonye really najyaga mureba, of course najyaga mureba, but ariko igihe mwamuhostingaga wowe na Claude, I was like damn, this guy is the man, you know. Aba nibo bantu baba bakeneye kuba exposed, bakeneye platform kugira ngo ibintu byumvikane, kandi na cause, burya cause iyo ariyo yose iba ikeneye umuntu ubasha kuyisobanura neza akajya imbere y'abantu akayipresenta, nibwo cause yumvikana. Ubu rero ndibaza ko nta bibazo bikiriho kuri Zimbabwe, ubu noneho ibintu byo muri Zimbabwe birasobanutse, birakemutse neza, twumvishe ikibazo, twumvishe inkomoko yawo, tunumvishe noneho ni gisubizo umuntu ashobora kubafashaho n'ibyo babafashaho. Nuko rero kamiyo twivugire mu Kinyarwanda. You know, turahari muri after party, yo, umutwe washyushye, erega shaho nyine iyo umuntu nyine ashaka kwihinga nyine umutwe urashyuha nyine, none se imitwe idashyuha nuko ntakirimo, urumva niba umutwe washyushye nuko umutwe wanyu usanzwe ari intelligent, iyo udashyuha hari kuba ari vide, tete vide ntabwo zishyuha, niba imitwe yanyu yashyushye nuko muruzuye, mufite ubwenge, mwabukoresheje nyine bwashyushye none. Abantu ubu ndi kunywa amazi sha. Amazi y'umugezi nyamugezi, y'amazi nababwiye umuntu atereka nimugoroba. Yo, mwumvishe ibyo muri Zimbabwe, mwumvishe se abandi banyafurika ko bavuga bati Kagame turakwemera uri umuhanga, ariko turashaka ko ubwo buhanga bwawe ubukoreshereza abanyafurika, ubukoreshereza ku benefitinga Afurika. Nanjye nicyo ngicyo navuga niba uri umuhanga, niba Imana yaraguhaye ubuhanga n'ubushishozi n'ubumenyi n'iki byose, bikoreshe ugirira neza abantu bawe. First and foremost, bya bindi bavuga ngo charity well organized starts at home. Niba ufite umutima, niba ufite urukundo, hera iwanyu, hera ku Banyarwanda, noneho unanabikoreshe uproteje abandi Banyafurika, kugira ngo bazavuge bati twagize umuntu w'umunyabwenge, ubwenge bwabukoresha atugirira neza. Ariko si bwo murabyumva koko mu mateka bizamenyekana ko twagize umuntu w'umunyabwenge nka Kagame, ariko ubwenge bwe akabukoresha arimbura abandi Banyafurika, anakorera bampatse ibihugu. Oya, ibyo bintu bigomba kurangira, mukamenya ko iyo umuntu ababwiza ukuri nabwo ni urukundo, kuko iyo umuntu atagukunda yakubeshya turejoro, burya no kubabwira ukuri nabwo ni ukubakunda. Ariko abantu babifata nk'urwango. You know, ariko rero iyo niyo nama nzima. Ubwenge bwanyu muri abanyabwenge, ubwenge bwanyu rero igisigaye nuko mwabukoresha kugira ngo benefiting Abanyafurika n'Abanyarwanda, duhereye ku Banyarwanda, you know. Yeah, ngo ahubwo warabicikirije iby'amazi. Yo, amazi y'umugisha narayababwira ngo mubyumve, kandi murabizi neza ko n'ubusanzwe umuntu aba agomba kunywa byibuze litiro imwe y'amazi ku munsi. Iyo litiro y'amazi ku munsi se uzayinywa gute, you know? Ariko iyo bigirije konsiya mukabikora, ndakubwiye iyi ngiyi ni hafi lita, mbona ari hafi, iyi ntabwo ihagije, ubundi nagombye gutereka ikibindi kinini cyane, ariko kubera ko nyine nta kibindi mfite, aka niko kabindi nabonye. Bituma unywa y'amazi ushinzwe kunywa nuko. Yo, ubushize rero hano kuri anniversaire yanjye twarabyinnye, reka sinakubwira, ariko noneho abantu bakajya bambwira ngo indirimbo ndi gushyiramo ngo ntabwo bari kuzumva. Reka rero noneho nshyiremo indirimbo hano numve niba muyumva, kugira ngo twige ukuntu ubutaha nidukora pari tuzajya dushyiramo indirimbo noneho mukazumva. Gusa ikibazo mfite ni screen. Hariya hari televiziyo, sinzi niba tugomba guhindura kamera kugira ngo irebe byibuze amashusho, ariko ubwo yenda mwakumva indirimbo gusa mutareba amashusho sera. I don't know. Anyways, reka turebe ukuntu byifashe kuri YouTube. Yo, ninde wari wavuze ngo indirimbo? Ninde wari wavuze indirimbo? Reka turebe akaririmbo hano k'umunyarwandakazi. Turebe akaririmbo hano k'umunyarwandakazi. Reka tubuje ibintu. Okay. Mwatangiye kubona screen hari inyuma. Yo. Inyigisho nziza. Yo. Ebana hano tuba turi muri education yo. Ikintu cya mbere abantu bakeneye ni education. Kuko burya erega n'ibihugu biba muri za demokarasi n'iki byose ntabwo ari gutyo byamye bimeze. None se mu Bufaransa kera bari bafite abami bari barigize akaraha kajya he? Abami bo pressing abantu, babona abantu bashonje bakavuga ngo niba nta mugati mufite ngo nimurye gato, ngo niba nta mazi mufite ngo nimunywe champagne. Abakire aristocrate na royauté baryaga gato bakinywera champagne. Abaturage bababwira bati twebwe nta n'amazi tugira, nta n'umugati tugira. Bati nta mugati nta mazi, nise mwanyweye champagne, nise mwariye gato. Yo, ndababwiye ngo Abafaransa bakubita revolution noneho bagera kuri repubulika. Urumva se rero abanyarwanda bagomba guharanira ibyo bashaka, kuko ntabwo bizava mu ijuru. N'ahandi aho babigezeho barabiharaniye, kandi nabo kera babaga muri dictatorship yahatari cyane, inarenze dictatorship zabagaho. Abanyarwanda bakunda gupinga abami babo, ariko se mu gihe hari hariho ubwami mu Rwanda, mujye mukompara. Mu gihe hari hariho ubwami mu Rwanda, murebe noneho n'ahandi hariho ubwami nko mu Bwongereza cyangwa mu Bafaransa, murebe uko abami baho bitwaraga ku baturage babo. Urumva se barabakandamizaga birenze n'iby'iwacu, kandi nabo bahoraga mu ntambara. Ariko byageze aho abantu baribohoza, habamo abantu bo mu mafamiye akize afata responsabilité akajya guharanira. Urumva se akajya guharanira abaturage, abantu baba muri la noblesse mu Bongereza no mu Bafaransa. Ubundi la noblesse, responsabilité y'amafamiye akize, abantu bari influent muri société, ni uguharanira abaturage no kwitambika hagati y'umwami wa feki, bagaharanira abaturage nkuko bari abuzukuru n'abasekuru babo babikoze. Ibintu byo guharanira abaturage ni c'est ça la responsabilité de la noblesse quoi, Rero sinjya numva ukuntu muzaba muri noblesse mudaharanira abaturage. Urumva? Anyways, kadushyiremo akaririmbo twumve. Muriyumva se? Umwami w'ishyamba Niharira wese. My people, muri kuyumva se? Mubanza mumbwire niba muri kuyumva. Kubyumva, ntabwo kubyumva. Yo, Kami, sinzi niba ari mukuru wawe cyangwa niba uri umwana wawe. Michelle yanyeretse indirimbo ya Kizomba. Nahise nsara ndavuga ngo nkeneye kujya muri class za Kizomba. None mpereye ku mazuki ibyibuze. Sawa, sawa. Muri kuyumva se? Mumbwire niba muri kuyumva. Reka dushyiremo amashusho. Niharira wese. Ntabwo byumvikana. Ntabwo uri kumvikana. Ntabwo uri kumvikana. Oh man, nari nzi ko iri kumvikana. None se ubu ngubu tuzabigenza gute koko? Dukeneye izindi studio. Dukeneye izindi studio. Kizomba. Yo, okay, reka nshyiramo iya nyuma. Hanyuma mbasezere. Reka nshyiremo iya nyuma. Hanyuma mbasezere mugende mwigire muri weekend yanyu. Ebana ni mutawe muri kuyumva ubwo nyine nta kundi byagenda. Kubera ko nyine ukuntu the way is set up right here, sinzi niba muri bubashe kubyumva, ariko katugerageze iyi ya nyuma noneho yo gukrotira.
When the going gets tough,
Publicité ntushobora kubirenza. Knowless. Kizito Mihigo, umuntu wese ushaka kuba perezida w'u Rwanda udashaka kwiga ubwiru azajya ahora yereka igihugu. Icyo kintu ni so important, tukirangirize kubera ko mwibuke ko abiru d'abord umwiru ni iki, kugira ngo abantu bamenye ngo abantu ngo kwiga ubwiru ni iki. Umwiru ni iki? Abiru ni abahanga, ni abanyamabanga bazi code esoterique, ni nkaho kugira connaissance spirituelle, connaissance physique. Babaga ari abantu b'abahanga cyane, barafashe amateka, barafashe ibyo bagomba gukora by'ibwami byose babizi. Noneho rero akaba ari nkabo ubwami bwubatseho cyangwa umwami yubatseho, aribo bafasha umwami kuyobora neza, aribo bamugira inama, ari nabo bareba bati uyu mwami ntabwo ashoboye, bagahita bamukorera kudeta, bagahita bamuhinduza undi ubishoboye, kubera ko inshingano yabaga ari ugushaka umwami uzabera umushumba Imana, mbega Imana. Ubundi umwami akorera Imana, noneho arimo araragira igihugu, aragira abana b'Imana, akorera Imana, agirira neza abana b'Imana. Rero abiru babaga bagomba gushaka umuntu nyine ushoboye iyo gahunda, urumva se. Rero kuva nk'uko mubibona ubu ngubu abiru bavuyeho, na nyuma y'ubwami abiru barabashakaga bakabica. Hanyuma ikindi ni uko barabishe, barabasenye cyane. Pourtant nibo bafasha igihugu, nibo barebera igihugu, nibo bamakinga sure ko umwami akorera igihugu, akorera abantu, adakorera izo intere zindi twavuze z'ahandi hose. Ikigaragara rero ni uko abaperezida b'u Rwanda batakigira, non seulement bakigira abiru, ariko ubwo murumva ko bashyizweho n'izo pouvoir zindi étrangère, noneho nta biru bafite, noneho nta nubwo bashobora kugira access ku bwiru, kubera ko ba advisor babo ni bande, ni babanyoni bandi bo muri Europe, nabo baba criminel, nibo baba advisinga umwami w'u Rwanda. Urumva se nta kuntu rero u Rwanda rutagenda nabi, kandi aba advisor traditionnel, abantu b'abahanga bakunda u Rwanda nk'abiru, barasenywe, n'abakiriho baba muri underground. Urumva se baba muri underground. Rero ni ibintu bikomeye cyane, ariko nk'uko Kizito Mihigo yarabivuze, umuntu wese ushaka kuba perezida w'u Rwanda, umuyobozi, agomba kumenya ubwiru, otherwise azajya ahora ayobora nabi, azajya akomeza koreka u Rwanda. Icyo nakwifuriza u Rwanda nyine ni abayobozi bazima, abayobozi babashije kwihingamo ubumana, gushaka gusa n'Imana kuri iyi si, kuko iyo ushaka gusa n'Imana kuri iyi si nta muntu ugirira nabi, nta muntu uhemukira, cyane cyane Imana yera, Imana originali, Imana y'u Rwanda, Imana itica. Imana y'u Rwanda ni Imana nziza, ni Imana yera, ni Imana yanze no kwica urupfu. Muzasoma umugani w'ukuntu urupfu rwaje mu Banyarwanda, mu muco wa Kinyarwanda. Ni ukuvuga ngo Imana ni rurema, ntabwo ari Imana yica. Jusqu'au point umwami Imana n'inkuba ngo bajya guhiga urupfu, Imana yanze kwica urupfu, kandi ari urupfu. Urumva se. Rero iyo umuntu aharanira kwihingamo ubumana, akagerageza gusa n'Imana, aba umuyobozi mwiza cyane. Kandi wihinzemo ugerageje kwihingamo ubumana ugaswata, byibuze wagwa mu bumuntu. Urumva se. Rero abantu bakihingamo ubumana, bakihingamo ubumuntu, bakava mu bunyamaswa, b'abanyamaswa. Icyo nicyo nifuriza u Rwanda na Afurika, n'abayobozi bihinzemo ubwo bumuntu, bakazamuka bakagerana hejuru y'ubumuntu, bakihingamo ubumana, bakarenga ubunyamaswa, noneho bagakorera abantu neza, bari muri ya mahoro n'umunezero za santima nababwiye, emosiyo zonyine zemewe imbere y'Imana, amahoro n'umunezero. N'abo bayobozi dukeneye, n'ushaka kuba umuyobozi wese abyihingemo hakiri kare, utangire ubibe byo uyu munsi, apana kuvuga ngo uzaba byo wamaze kugera muri pozisiyo y'ubuyobozi, ngo niyongera muri pozisiyo y'umuyobozi nibwo nzaba umwana mwiza, nibwo nzitwara neza. No, tangira witware neza uyu munsi. Noneho uzajye muri ntuza nyine warageze aho hose. Yo, so my people, murakoze cyane, murakoze cyane. Uyu ninde wapinze umuntu hano ngo Knowless? Knowless abyina nabi. Knowless kubyina ntabwo ari ibye, ntabwo ari umubyinnyi, ni umuririmbyi. Ni umuririmbyi, ntabwo abaririmbyi bose bazi kubyina. Rega waba kurayise abaririmbyi bazi kuririmba bakamenya no kubyina, kuko n'uriya Beyonce yitiriye Beyonce nawe azi kubyina, ariko mu kuririmba nabwo azi kuririmba bya hatari, ariko ntabwo ari Aretha Franklin, you know what I mean? Aretha Franklin noneho yararirimbaga, ariko Aretha Franklin nta nubwo ntabwo azwi kubera ngo kubyina kwe, azwi kubera kuririmba ijwi rye. Nibyo my people, murakoze cyane. Iyi ndirimbo yishyizemo, si njyewe wayishyizemo, ni ya ndirimbo ya Ben ya Habibi, nibaza ko ari Habibi. Yeah. Undi muntu nkunda ahubwo ni uyu mu Nigeria, indirimbo y'Imana yo mu rusengero. Ubwo ngiye kuyishyiramo nyirangirizeho ari njyewe, ndi busigare nyiyumvira. Nubwo ntajya muri church, ariko nkunda gospel music, some of it. Iyi ngiyi, this is my top, this is my favorite, muzajye kuyireba. Yitwa ngo, umugore yitwa Sinach, SINACH. Indirimbo yitwa ngo There's an Overflow. Ebana ndayikunda bya hatari. Rero ubwo reka mbasezereho, nkomeze njye kwiyumvira indirimbo, nanakurotire ikiganiro cyagenze neza cyane. I love it so much. Batubwiye ko byifashe muri Zimbabwe, abafite amafaranga twamanutse, abashaka gukiza Afurika twagiye. Ubundi niyo twabigereranya n'ibintu abantu basomye Bibiliya, ubundi bavuga ko biriya bavuga ngo Abayahudi babaye ngo esclave muri Egypte, ngo hanyuma ngo basohoka bafite ubukire bwinshi cyane. Ubundi biriya bintu ni mythology nyine, kuko nta esclavage yigeze ibaho muri Egypte, cyane ntabwo Abayahudi bigeze baba esclave muri Egypte. Ahubwo ikiri real ni uko abirabura, Abanyafurika babaye esclave muri Amerika, kandi ubu turi kuri plantation ya Amerika na Canada. Ariko bavuga ko umunsi twavuye hano hantu tuzahavana ubukire bwinshi cyane, tugataha iwacu muri Afurika dufite ubukire bwinshi cyane, tugakiza n'abo twasanze. Rero my people, nibyo ngibyo mbifuriza, nibyo ngibyo nifuriza, ko turakire twese, noneho ubukire bwacu tukabufata tukabujyana n'iwacu, nabo tukabakiza. Dukeneye ko n'abayobozi bacu nabo ubukire bwabo bafite mu mutwe babukoresha bakoreshereza Abanyafurika. Ni gutyo Afurika izabaho. Tujye twibuka ko Imana ijya kurema yarabanje irema Umunyafurika niwe muntu original kuri ino si, niwe imfura y'ikiremwa muntu, nitwe my people. Rero igihe kirageze ko imfura z'ikiremwa muntu zongera zigafata place yazo, zongera zigafata intebe ya leadership, bakayobora isi, kuko nk'uko mubibona isi yaracangagikiwe. Ikeneye ko imfura zongera zikayobora isi. Izo mfura there's an overflow, abundance of favor, It's a new level. It's a new level. There's an overflow. Abundance of blessing. I take it over. I take it over. We're taking over, my people. Abundance of favor. It's a new level. It's a new level. My people, duhorane Imana. New level. Tuzamuke. New level. New level. New level. Twavuye mu nyamaswa, twavuye mu nzoka, twavuye mu biti n'ibyatsi. Twageze mu bumuntu, twageze mu bumana. My people, new level. New level. Walking in abundance, moving with the Spirit, Holy Ghost. Favor. Yo, turimo turagenda mu bukire. Yo, walking in abundance. Favor. Walking in abundance, moving with the Spirit. Favor. Walking in abundance, moving with the Spirit of the Holy Ghost. Favor. Walking in abundance, moving with the Spirit. Favor. Imana iradukunda, my people. New levels. Ntawe itazatugeza kuba tukiriho, turi aho turi hose. Imana iradukunda. New level. Tujye kuri izo levels. Tuzamuke, twazamuke. Murabeho ndabakunda sante bamuko. Naho ubutaha, my people. Naho ubutaha. Naho ubutaha. Naho ubutaha. Take it over. 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 Amen. Imam. Take it over. Walking in abundance.